Chapter 278. The rocket launcher's tail flame was still spurting, but it couldn't break through another inch. It stopped in the air half a meter away. Go back. Kale pointed again, and the green fog light effect wrapped around his fingers. The light gathered at his fingertips and condensed into a dazzling green light. Under his precise and perfect control, the direction of gravitational traction was immediately reversed, and the 3 rocket shells slowly turned around and returned to their original trajectories. Boom! 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 3 small fireballs exploded on the ground again, illuminating a corner of the base. Many of the Hydra armed forces who had just gathered from the outside were shocked. What a pity! It's just gravitational traction, the lowest branch of the force field series. This is almost the limit of my ability. Kale sighed softly and retracted his 2 fingers. Although the ability to fly slowly, create a certain gravitational repulsive field, and deflect a rocket launcher seemed very powerful, it was actually the greatest effect of the gravitational traction ability. There was no room for further exploration and development of its potential. Using gravitational traction was fine against ordinary people, but against superhumans like Black Widow and Captain America, who had strengthened their bodies, it could only be used as an auxiliary means to affect their movements. And against people like Thor and Hulk, it could only be used as a suppressive ability. After all, it was only a blue ability card. For it to reach this level, it was already a supreme grade card close to the rare rank. But this performance was still enough to shock Lorna. It was as if she had opened the door to a new world. Her beautiful eyes stared straight at Kale. Boss, you have to teach me the proficiency ability later. Kale shook his head and said calmly, in terms of the use of mutant abilities, Yutong, Logan, and I are still a little lacking. They're the experts at developing their abilities to the extreme. Who's Logan? Lorna tilted her head. Kale shrugged and said, one of the founding members of Family Cal. He's not on Earth right now. Not on Earth? Lorna was stunned. Clearly, she hadn't integrated into Family Cal yet. If she was familiar with some things in the family, she wouldn't be making a fuss over some unnatural things. You'll find out in the future. Pondering, Kale looked down at the enemies who had entered the base and said to Yutong, go. Let Lorna see the full extent of your abilities. Yutong nodded. Silver light flowed in her eyes. Wrapped in a layer of faint fluorescent light, she broke free from the gravitational field in the air and flew down. Yutong can fly as well. Lorna's jaw dropped in surprise. She had a good relationship with Yutong, but she had never seen Yutong display all of her abilities. She had always thought that it was just a mind-reading ability. Kale explained, Yutong's ability is telekinesis. According to its potential, it's between your gravitational pull and magnetic field control. Lorna's heart trembled slightly. Her sense of superiority over her own abilities disappeared as she stared at Yutong. She fell. Only when she was half a meter above the ground did Yutong stop in the air. She stood lightly on the concrete ground of the base square. The hem of her black dress fluttered slightly as her silver eyes scanned the enemies around her mercilessly. She was alone, but she chose to land in the middle of the enemy army. She was like a flirtatious black rose that bloomed in a unique place. Bulletproof armed vehicles with machine guns were densely parked around the perimeter. The moment Yutong fell into the field, hundreds of armed soldiers uniformly aimed their guns at her. Enemy! Shoot! Kill her! The experienced members of Hydra wouldn't be careless just because the other party was a beautiful woman. In just a short moment, they decisively reacted. Da-da-da. Blue flames emerged from the muzzles of the guns. The dense torrent of bullets formed a large net that covered Yutong. Lorna, who saw this scene in the sky, couldn't help but cry out in surprise. She instinctively wanted to reach out and use her ability to save her. The next moment, she stopped all her actions. Shock and horror replaced her eyes. Yutong raised her slender hands slightly and spread her palms to both sides, forming a circular air shield around her body. The rain of bullets all lost their momentum as soon as they got within a meter of her and were strangely nailed in the air. They came from all directions. A round of bullets lasted more than 10 seconds. The armored soldiers didn't stop until all the bullets in the clip were poured out. Yutong, who was in the middle, was surrounded by dense bullets. The bullets nailed in the air formed a steel eggshell. Even people who didn't have trypophobia gasped when they saw this. Their backs were cold and their scalps were numb. Is this a repulsive ability? Lorna asked in surprise. It's also mental control. It's just concentrating one's mind to form an absolute mental control field within a meter of the body. Any external attack will be blocked outside. At this point, Kale praised from the bottom of his heart. This is the power of Yutong's ability to the extreme. That 1 meter area is her exclusive domain. Even God can't set foot in it. When a rare blue ability card was used to such a perfect extent, it would be able to fight even against an enemy with a purple ability card. In the base square. Inside the bullet encirclement, Yutong's eyes shone brightly with silver light. A super strong mental power was activated from her brain and condensed into an invisible shockwave that burst outward. Bzzzt, the bullets nailed in the air vibrated. Then, they were wrapped by her mental power and exploded into pieces, shooting at the armored soldiers around her with pale faces. Swoosh! In the front row, there were nearly 30 or so armed men. They all groaned in pain and fell down, just like the scene of a sickle harvesting wheat. There were countless bullet holes on the corpses. Viscous blood gushed out. They would never have dreamed that they would be killed by their own bullets. Yutong was unscathed. Her beautiful silver eyes were cold. Not even a trace of blood was stained on her dark black dress. This was Qi Tong, the Black Queen, one of the 3 heads of family Cal, the Guardian. So strong. Lorna was amazed. Kale nodded. This precise mental control was far more perfect than it was 60 years ago. It's a pity that it's only a rare blue ability. If it's a rare purple ability, Kale thought for a while and was stunned. He looked at Yutong below and narrowed his eyes, deep in thought. Where did the mutated ability of mental control come from? It was a genetic mutation, the first benign evolution of humans. Since genes could evolve once and obtain superpowers from nothing, was it possible to evolve a second time on top of the foundation? A second evolution, shouldn't it be called ability awakening? Is it possible for Yutong's ability to awaken? If her ability awakens, will her ability card advance to the purple level? Kale thought to himself. His eyes shone. Chapter 279. Superpowers could be awakened and evolved. Kale was certain of this. For example, there was a saying of awakening in the Protoss genes, which meant that ordinary Protoss could evolve into the king of gods like Odin. Unfortunately, there were very few mutants in this world. There were no precedents, so there was no way to know the basic conditions for awakening. But at this moment, seeing Yutong unleashing her superpower to the extreme, Kale suddenly understood something. If there was awakening, Yutong was undoubtedly infinitely close to the threshold of fullness. She was just a little bit away from triggering it. But it's just half a step, invisible and untouchable. It's easier said than done to break the shackles of superhuman ability and awaken superhuman genes for the second time. Kale sighed in his heart and stopped thinking about this problem. He just planted a seed of hope in his heart. In the square of the base. Under the dark night, corpses were strewn all over the ground. Blood gathered and flowed into scarlet streams. Yutong's long skirt swayed. She tiptoed and walked forward like a cat. She was elegant and extremely dangerous, like a beautiful and deadly leopard on the grassland. She stepped on the blood and corpses, but her shoes and skirt were not stained at all. Everything, including the tiny dust particles in the air, was isolated by the rippling mental waves in the void. 1 meter within her body, the mental domain. Bang! The loud and dull sound of a sniper rifle came from afar. In the next moment, the spiral armor-piercing bullet had crossed the distance of half a kilometer and pierced through the air toward Yutong's forehead. Buzz, the power of this sniper bullet was amazing. Under the obstruction of the mental domain, it broke through half a meter in front of Yutong before finally stopping. But that was it. Not to mention half a meter, even a millimeter difference was a natural moat. But then, the second and third sniper rifle shots rang out again. Yutong's eyes flashed silver. She flicked her fingers and the light of her mental domain intertwined. The first bullet was converted into her own power and rebounded. Bang! The bullets collided and then burst into tiny metal fragments. One of the fragments continued to move forward under the strong support of her mental domain. The fragment and the third bullet met and burst into pieces again. What? On a hill half a kilometer away, a top sniper suddenly raised his head, his face full of shock and disbelief. I found you. Yutong's lips curled into a smile. At such a long distance, the telepathic ability was already too far to reach. She waved her hand, and an enemy rifle on the ground fell into her hand. Before she even aimed, she fired 3 shots at the distant hill. Half a kilometer away, the sniper widened his eyes in horror. He lowered his head and looked at the 2 bullet holes in his chest. His consciousness dissipated and he fell to the ground. Half a kilometer, 2 hits out of 3. Not bad, Kale said with a smile. If the enemy mistakenly thought that Yutong was only good at telekinesis, they would undoubtedly die a horrible death. After all, she had the super agent ability card, and with the addition of her cognition, she was almost omnipotent. Rain Eyes was Kyle's most perfect work so far. There was no other work that could compare to it. After Yutong killed the sniper, she took out a clip of bullets and used her telepathic ability to wreak havoc. With a telepathic barrier as protection, she controlled the bullets to launch fierce attacks. With every step she took, several armed soldiers fell. Even more armed soldiers could only fight and retreat, like a lawnmower harvesting lives mechanically and mercilessly. After such a long time, my subordinates and I are getting stronger and stronger, but Hydra is deteriorating. Kale shook his head and looked coldly at the one-sided armed personnel below. In the past, they had laser weapons made from unlimited energy and Red Skull to hold the fort. Now, Hydra was really regressing. Boss, can I go down and play? Lorna looked at the killing scene below and said eagerly. Play? Do you think you're playing a game? Kale looked at her and said, but it's good to have more actual combat. It's easiest to accept and master your abilities in battle, but you have to bring venom. With that, Kale waved his hand, and a ball of black liquid crashed into Lorna's arms. Venom? What's that? Lorna was shocked. She hurriedly touched her chest, only to find that the liquid had quickly seeped into her clothes and body. In Lorna's mind, Venom sighed and whispered, "Sigh, I have to take care of a child again, child? Who are you calling a child?" Lorna raised her eyebrows in dissatisfaction, but she couldn't find the source of the voice. I'm talking about you. Dark wings spread out from her back, and Lorna cried out in shock. Her hair was in a mess as Venom brought her down. Immediately, an armed personnel aimed and fired. Lorna looked at the dense bullets coming at her and raised her hands in panic. Wait, I'm not mentally prepared yet. I know. Venom seemed to be curling his lips, and a dark membrane appeared in time to cover Lorna's slender body. The bullets landed on the dark skin and bounced off. She ignored the bullets and landed deep in the enemy's ranks. Awesome! Lorna's scarlet eyes lit up as her abilities finally took effect. As the green fog lingered, the rifles in the hands of the armed personnel nearby flew out and floated above her head. The rifles moved closer and formed a circle. The muzzles were slightly tilted and aimed at the armed men. Goodbye. Lorna smiled coldly and took over all the metal firearms. She rotated and fired, and the unarmed Hydra members fell to the ground with cries of despair. Isn't Venom's cheat a little too big? How can she train her abilities if she deals with it so easily? Kale frowned, but he quickly relaxed. Although Lorna was strong, she wasn't skilled enough. She couldn't quickly and accurately control her abilities. For example, the sniper bullet aimed at Yutong just now might have killed Lorna in her current state. It's allowed in peaceful times that you don't have to hone your abilities and skills on a murderous battlefield. You can slowly grow in a safe greenhouse. Kale retracted his gaze from the intense but foregone conclusion of the battlefield below. 10 minutes later, Yutong and Lorna joined forces and annihilated the Hydra Legion that had besieged the base with overwhelming force, leaving no survivors. When Kale returned to the ground from the sky, Vice happened to push away the bricks and crawl out of the basement buried in the ruins. It flew back with a dirty face. How was it? Kale asked it. Weiss reported, Hydra's highest level of confidential information has been destroyed, but Hydra's hidden base locations all over the world, a total of 35, I have all the information and information. Is there any news of my eldest sister and second brother? Lorna asked hurriedly. Vice shook its head and replied, no. Their existence belongs to the highest level confidential files of Hydra. Okay. Lorna bit her lower lip. Tonight's harvest was pretty good. Kale couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't just good. With the location of almost all of Hydra's bases, the situation was very clear. Time was completely on their side. Chapter 280. At this time, Yutong walked back with an enemy satellite communicator in her hand. A small green light was flashing on it. Obviously, someone wanted to get in touch with them. Boss, this is the communicator on the enemy commander. Yutong handed over the communicator. Kyle took it with one hand and answered the call without any hesitation. The man on the other side of the communicator, after the communication was connected, immediately growled impatiently, "What are you doing? Why are you dilly-dallying? Has Steve Rogers solved it for me?" Kale looked around. Around the three of them, the armed personnel had all become corpses lying on the ground. Hearing no answer, the man was keenly aware that something was wrong and said in a deep voice, "Who are you? Who answered the phone?" Kale's mouth rose and said indifferently to the communicator, "One more day." As soon as he finished speaking, his hand exerted a little force and the communicator flashed with sparks and exploded. "Let's go, we'll go back first." Kale patted off the fragments in his hand and gave the next order. It was time for the century-long feud with Hydra to come to an end in New York. New York, next to the SHELD headquarters, in a luxurious duplex villa. In the dead of night, the lights in the hall on the third floor were not turned on. Under the dim yellow tile lamp, only two men were sitting on the sofa facing each other. One of the middle-aged men had neat blonde hair, was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, and had a calm and experienced aura of a high position. But at this time, a drop of cold sweat appeared on his forehead, slid down his face, and dripped straight from his chin to his expensive trousers. Pierre put down the communicator in a daze, his face pale and his brows furrowed as he thought frantically. The voice of the young man just now, there was no mistaking it, it must be him, Hydra's #1 enemy. Since he's there, it means that the hundreds of armed forces I sent to deal with Captain Steve have been destroyed. Pierre's heart was bleeding, and at the same time, fear spontaneously filled his whole body. He said, "One more day, what does that mean? Does he know all this and will make a move in one more day?" He directly stated that he would make a move in a day. The pressure he gave people was endless. Because he was a symbol of peace, and that was enough. Nick Fry is dead, and that man probably knows my real identity. There's no turning back now. While Pierre was anxiously thinking about countermeasures, the other man sitting on the sofa opposite him was silent. The man's hair was disheveled, and he was wearing a long-sleeved leather jacket. The entire mechanical arm on his left hand reflected a faint metallic glow, and there was a dark red pentagram symbol on his arm. Pierre seemed to have thought of something. He stared at the silent man and asked, "That's right. Winter Soldier, you must answer me exactly. If you are up against Kale, what are your chances of winning?" Kai. Er? Hearing this name, the Winter Soldier looked up, and there was some fluctuation in his cold and dead eyes. After a long silence, the Winter Soldier said indifferently, "I have no chance of winning against him." As expected. Pierre's face was calm. If the Winter Soldier said that he could block the symbol of peace, he should have been surprised. The Winter Soldier could only be used to deal with Steve at most, but against an enemy of Kale's level, ordinary means were far from enough. Time is too tight. The aircraft carrier must be sent to the sky before tomorrow morning. As for Kale, Pierre was firm in this idea. Who? The Winter Soldier's ears moved slightly, and he suddenly stood up, looking coldly at the door of the hall. At some point, a person only 1 meter short, wearing a black cloak, and his figure and face could not be seen clearly, stood at the door and looked at them quietly. Pierre said coldly, "What is it? Deal with it." Without his order, the Winter Soldier had already moved ahead and crossed about 10 meters at a superhuman speed. He jumped directly over the dwarf, clenched his mechanical left fist, and slammed it down. Bang! The fist fell on the smooth floor of the hall, and under the impact of several tons, the tiles instantly cracked and collapsed like a spider web. The Winter Soldier's eyes were cold. He missed, and he did not see the opponent's dodging movements and traces at all. The moment before the fist fell on the dwarf disappeared out of thin air without warning. "Behind you!" Pierre's surprised voice sounded. When the Winter Soldier heard this, he was still in the air. He used his left fist to support himself on the ground, twisted his waist forcefully, and swept his leg back like lightning. With this kick, even a car would be kicked a few meters away. Whoosh! At the critical moment, the cloaked dwarf disappeared out of thin air, and the Winter Soldier's attack missed again. Before Pierre could react, he saw a black shadow flash, and the cloaked dwarf sat on the sofa in front of him. "If you make another move, I will kill this guy." The cloaked dwarf made an old and hoarse voice, pointing at Pierre. The Winter Soldier naturally would not listen to the threat and was about to rush forward. Pierre hurriedly waved his hand to stop him. "Winter Soldier, stop." The Winter Soldier stiffly stopped, standing in the hall like a sculpture. Pierre looked at the cloaked dwarf and asked respectfully and fearfully, "This old gentleman, don't talk nonsense. You just need to know that I am here to help you." The cloaked dwarf interrupted him. "Help me?" Pierre was a little confused. The cloaked dwarf said very easily, "Aren't you going to deal with the symbol of peace tomorrow? I will help you stop him." "You, stop the symbol of peace?" Pierre took a deep breath and asked suspiciously but excitedly, "I don't know what to call you." The cloaked dwarf said seriously, "Me? Call me Little Ancestor." Dehao Building, Underground Conference Hall. A temporary secret meeting was being held here, held by Kale. Hulk, Banner, Iron Man, Tawny, Colonel Ross, and General Thunderbolt were invited to participate. They were the most reliable and powerful outsiders that Kale could gather, except for Family Cal. Kale tapped his fingers on the table and said calmly, "Vice has just told you the specific matters. The relevant information will be sent to you tomorrow morning. You just need to complete the tasks you are responsible for." Tawny said emotionally, "Godfather, you are exaggerating, it is indeed a big deal." Ross agreed. He looked at General Thunderbolt and said in a low voice, "Our military will give the greatest help, but after all, it is something that has to be done behind the backs of the senators and the president. It is obviously impossible to mobilize the army on a large scale." General Thunderbolt nodded. "You just need to provide support. Your army is not needed as the main force. Kale smiled softly. Then who can be the main force? Ross asked curiously. Am I not? Bruce pointed to his nose. Everyone was speechless. Indeed, Hulk alone could defeat an elite army, but it was too easy for him to lose control. Don't worry, I naturally have the main force. Kale said with certainty and calmness. After tomorrow, the century-old foundation of the Hydra organization will be erased from the Earth, and they will never be able to rise again. Chapter 281. There was a saying that before welcoming guests or fighting enemies, you should first clean up your house. It was the same principle now. The threat of the Hydra organization was not great, but from time to time, they would jump out and cause trouble, just like a piece of rat feces added to the porridge. It was disgusting. Kale decided not to make a move, but once he did, he would break it with one blow, severely injuring and erasing the roots of the Hydra organization. This plan, or secretly plotting, was directly called the Earth Cleanup Plan. The next day, in the morning. As usual, the downtown area of New York City was bustling with people and traffic in the steel jungle formed by tall buildings. Today was another peaceful day. Since the beginning of the talk about heroes and the alien era, countless citizens habitually sighed in their hearts and hurriedly entered their own hard and fast-paced day of work. Of course, this was only on the surface of peace and harmony. At this time, where the public's eyes could not reach, the undercurrents of several forces were surging behind the city. Among them, in the area of a veteran service office, in the main hall of a duplex villa. Click, with the slight rotation of the mechanical gear teeth, the rocket-shaped backpack full of technological texture split, and a pair of mechanical wings with a dark metallic luster fluttered open. Each of the high-tech precision gliders was 2 meters long. A 35-year-old black young man, wearing a gray uniform and electronic sunglasses, raised his hands and turned in a circle, showing his high-tech equipment to the two people next to him. Steve, who was sitting in a chair, in addition to being surprised, could not help but blink and ask, "That? You said before that you are an injured retired pilot." "I am indeed a pilot and a paratrooper, but I have carried out the Falcon secret program, so I am half an elite agent," Sam Wilson explained in a deep voice. Natasha did not dwell on it so much, and said with a charming smile, "Who cares if it is a vulture or a falcon, as long as we can kill the enemy, now we have more combat power, and increase our chances of winning." Steve agreed and was about to continue to say something when the villa's doorbell suddenly rang. The expressions of the three people in the hall changed slightly, and they looked at each other silently. For a moment, even the atmosphere in the room became tense. "I didn't invite guests today, and I don't usually have friends." Sam made a hand gesture and communicated using sign language. He did not retract his mechanical wings and was ready to fly at any time. Steve quietly took a few steps forward and took the colorful shield from the sofa. Natasha remained calm as well. She bowed and reached for the holster on her calf. Holding the cold and small gun handle, she pulled out the pistol. Their bodies tensed up, and their minds were alert. They were about to take the lead in breaking through. "It's me." As if guessing the high tension of the three people in the room, a steady and powerful voice came from outside the door. Sam was still confused. Steve, who quickly recognized the voice, heaved a sigh of relief. Natasha even put the pistol back and quickly walked over to open the door. Looking at the person outside the door, Sam trembled all over and could not hide his excitement as he exclaimed, "Oh, my God, a living symbol of peace." "Birdman?" Kale looked at him with a slightly stunned expression. "You're my ultimate idol. Can you give me an autograph?" Sam fumbled for his uniform but could not find anything. Finally, an idea flashed in his mind and his hand slapped the mechanical wings on his back. "Please sign here." "Sam, that's enough. Last time you said I was your idol." Steve glanced at him in annoyance, put down the shield, and looked at Kale with a questioning gaze. "What's the situation now?" It's all under control," Kale said with a faint smile. He sat on the sofa and looked at Sam and his mechanical metal wings. Another hero who relied on technology, Falcon. Sure enough, after the Hydra rebellion lurking in SHELD was brought forward, due to Steve's request for help, he also officially embarked on his own life trajectory. "What do you mean by under control?" Steve asked. He was so busy saving the world and worried about this and that, but now, he directly said, "Small matter." Kale asked back, "You should know the real purpose of Project Insight, right?" "Of course." Steve nodded and said truthfully, "Not long ago, we caught a Hydra lackey and learned the truth from him. Hydra wants to use the power of SHELD to control 3 aircraft carriers into the sky and become their exclusive killing weapons." He was only halfway through his sentence when he saw Kale's calm expression and said, "Wait, so you already knew this?" Kale nodded lightly and said in an unquestionable tone, "Steve, when the aircraft carriers are in the sky, you take the smart chip up there and stop or delay their linkage." "No problem." Steve trusted him and agreed without hesitation. He asked curiously, "But what are you going to do?" "I'm going to the SHELD headquarters building," Kale answered indifferently. The few people in the hall suddenly felt a strange chill run down their spines. What did it mean for someone to go to the current SHELD alone? It was thought-provoking and terrifying. No one stopped Kale, and no one could stop his actions. Even Fry only begged to delay it for 2 days. "Where are the others?" Natasha was surprised. Only then did she notice that Yutong and the newly joined Lorna were not by Kale's side. It had to be known that Yutong almost never left Kale's side when he went out personally, unless there were special circumstances. They have something equally important to do. As Kale spoke, he plucked a fresh grape from the fruit plate on the table and threw it into his mouth as he chewed slightly. "It tastes pretty good. Do you want to eat? We'll take action after eating." Steve smiled bitterly. How could they be in the mood to eat grapes now? In New York later, no matter what, there would be bloody and smoke-filled disputes and battles. "Take your time eating. We're leaving first." Steve had already put on his tights. Now, he placed the Ada-man shield on his back and put on the helmet with half a mask. He returned to his previous World War II uniform. It was exactly the same without any changes. Not bad. Kale was a little bored. It was just the Hydra organization. It wasn't to the point where it was worth him taking it seriously. Steve and the others took their equipment, opened the door, and were about to leave. Suddenly, they stopped at the door and looked up at the sky in the distance. There were 3 steel fortresses as huge as islands. They seemed to ignore gravity and were slowly rising towards the blue sky under the drive of their engines. They had risen to a height of about 100 meters. "Kale. The aircraft carrier is in the sky," Steve hurriedly called out. Without hesitation, he took the 2 of them and left the villa, heading straight for the aircraft carrier. In the villa's hall. "It's 2 hours faster than expected. Can't wait any longer." Kale chuckled to himself and ordered the vice-deformed electronic watch on his wrist, "Inform everyone that we can act according to the original plan." Chapter 282. On this day, it was almost noon. People in the New York area raised their heads in shock and saw 3 huge metal fortresses floating up into the vast blue sky, casting a large shadow over the sky. Confusion, depression, fear, and other emotions caused the cars and pedestrians to stop in the streets and alleys. They looked at the 3 steel aircraft carriers in the sky, forming a triangle. On the highway leading to the city, a black Ford carrying Steve and the others was running at full speed, approaching the aircraft carrier in front of them at high speed. "Sam, drive faster," Steve urged, his left hand still holding a bald man in a suit with silver-rimmed glasses. The man in the suit was in the hands of Captain America and surrounded by the other two men. He didn't dare to move. Under the absolute power, there wasn't even a 1 in 10,000 chance of escaping. He sat in the car seat with cold sweat on his forehead and a pale face. He said with difficulty, "Brothers, I've said what I need to say. Where are you taking me now?" Steve didn't hide it and said bluntly, "It's very simple. We don't have the authority to enter the aircraft carrier. We have to borrow your iris and fingerprints to pass through the smart system." The man in the suit's mouth twitched slightly, his face was even paler. He said helplessly, "Are you demons? Pierre will kill me like this." The current director of SHELD, the spy of the Hydra organization, Alexander Pierre? Steve couldn't help but laugh. Natasha and Sam in the front seat also laughed. "Don't worry, he probably can't even take care of himself. It's dangerous." Steve was alarmed. He suddenly lowered his body and pressed the man in the suit down with his left hand. But he was still half a beat too slow. Poof! The glass window on the left exploded. Then, the head of the man in the suit burst from the outside like a watermelon. Red and white liquid splashed everywhere in the car. It was a sniper bullet. Steve was the first to confirm this. He moved his hand away from the headless corpse's waist and raised the shield on his back to block the bullet. Just as he finished this action, a dense barrage of rifle bullets hit the outer shell of the car, and even more fell on the shield with tinkling sounds. The broken shield was dented and fell down in a free fall. Before Steve could breathe a sigh of relief, Natasha, who was in the front passenger seat, exclaimed, "Be careful, there are more in front." As if responding to her warning, the Ford suddenly shook violently. With a huge backward inertia, the speed of the car turned from hundreds of kilometers per hour to zero in a few seconds. The moment the car hit something and stopped, Steve pressed his back against the back seat of the car and kicked the roof of the car with his feet. The entire roof of the roof was destroyed and flew out. He pressed down on the car seat with one hand and pushed hard with his other hand. His tall body jumped out of the car window upside down. After getting out of the car, Steve flipped over and stood firmly on the roof of the Ford. His sharp eyes glanced forward, and his tenacious and fearless mind immediately stirred up waves of emotions. He saw that it was a military green Jeep that had collided with the Ford. The front of both vehicles was smashed into pieces. But this was not the point. The point was that on the roof of the Jeep stood a young man in his 30s. The young man was wearing a cloth mask. His dirty blonde curly hair covered his face, revealing a pair of cold and indifferent eyes. He was wearing a uniform jacket and combat boots. His mechanical metal left arm was particularly eye-catching. He held an old-fashioned AK-47 in both hands. "It's you. It can't be wrong. Baki." Steve took a deep breath, and his face was filled with excitement. Since they separated in the end of World War II, they had both experienced death. After more than half a century, they finally met again. But the two people who had fought side by side and gone through fire and water were now confronting each other from different sides. Was God joking? Steve exhaled and was about to step forward. The familiar man in front of him called out the familiar name Baki. In the heart of the Winter Soldier, who had lost his personality, his brain was full of mission instructions. In the darkness that had been silent for a long time, a little shining memory rippled. However, it quickly dimmed and extinguished. The Winter Soldier was expressionless. He mechanically raised the AK-47 with both hands, pulled the trigger, and shot at his former comrade, Steve, who was less than 5 meters in front of him. SHELD Headquarters Building. Although the 3 aircraft carriers took off from here, after continuously rising, they gradually deviated from their trajectory and headed toward the city center. They were now thousands of meters away from the surface of the headquarters building. At this moment, a silver-haired young man in casual clothes, with his hands in his pockets, came to the front door as if he was bored. The silver-haired young man raised his eyes and looked around. He looked at the stone statues holding a shield and a sword on the left and right of the door and shook his head in deep irony. He took a few steps forward and arrived at the closed front door. The infrared automatically detected and identified the face and iris. Then, a mechanical prompt beeped. The user does not have permission to enter the headquarters. Please leave immediately. Okay. Kyle said to himself in a low voice, even my authority has been deleted. Everything that belongs to me has really been taken away by someone else. However, Vice was not with him for the time being. This time, he only brought venom. In that case, there is nothing to feel distressed about. Kale raised his left hand, and the black liquid bubbled out and turned into a cuticle membrane covering his entire arm. 3 sharp dark blades protruded from the bones of his fingers, and the tips quietly pressed against the 3-centimeter-thick tempered glass protective door. SHELD Headquarters Building, the director's office located near the top floor. Pierre stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the other side of the line of sight. The 3 aircraft carriers were still steadily rising into the air, causing him to clench and loosen his fists from time to time. His palms were sweaty. Subverting all the countries and forces on Earth, Hydra dominates and changes the world, and now only this last step is left. The Hydra organization's years of dormancy and tolerance, all the painstaking effort and energy put in for this moment of fear in the world. So now, Pierre's heart was filled with anticipation and nervousness. At this moment when his body and mind were extremely tense, the phone on the office table suddenly rang. Pierre quickly stepped forward and saw that it was the number of the headquarters downstairs. He picked up the microphone and said in a deep voice, "What's the matter?" "Director, and Anne." The female receptionist's words were intermittent, and the communication signal was good. This was because fear made her tongue and teeth tremble. Pierre had an ominous premonition in his heart and shouted, "What? Speak clearly." The female receptionist finally said a complete sentence in horror. The symbol of peace is here." "What?" Pierce sucked in a breath of cold air. His rosy face turned ghastly pale, and he almost fell on the office chair. The thing he was most worried about finally happened. At this time, in the lobby on the first floor of SHELD. The tempered glass protective door was closed as before, but there was a triangular gap in the middle that could allow 3 people to pass through. The cross-section of the gap was as smooth as a mirror, and the triangular glass that was cut out was lying inwards on the floor. Using the triangular glass as an ordinary carpet, Kale put away his dark claws. He was surrounded by a large group of agents in suits and leather shoes, and more armed military security guards were approaching. Chapter 283. SHELD Headquarters, First Floor Lobby. Due to the forceful intrusion, alarms were activated from the ceiling and walls. SHELD's elite agents and military special security forces gathered at the entrance. Many of them were armed with firearms, and some of them were equipped with high-tech equipment such as electric pistols and gravity handcuffs. But as soon as they reached the entrance, they all stopped in their tracks. Their expressions changed to shock and confusion as they looked at the so-called intruder with cold sweat dripping down their foreheads. The intruder was only one person, but he was stronger than thousands of soldiers. It was Kale, the symbol of peace. How could it be him? Most of the people in the lobby held their breaths. They were like subordinates in front of their superiors, or cats in front of lions and tigers. The director of SHELD had given an order earlier. The carrier of Project Insight was about to be activated. Today, anyone who invaded SHELD's headquarters was to be killed. If they couldn't kill them, they were to stall for time until the New York Army arrived. But if the intruder was the man in front of them, who could stand it? Countless agents cursed in their hearts. Except for some Hydra spies who had other identities, they all lowered their heads to hide their fear. Kale looked around. His golden eyes shone with dignity. No one dared to look him in the eye. Kale asked calmly, "What, are you going to stop me?" His words were just as calm, but it was like a clap of thunder that exploded in the lobby. No one dared to answer. Only the alarms in the lobby were still sounding anxiously. The commander of SHELD was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He walked from the back of the crowd to the front and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. He bowed and said respectfully, "Dear Mr. Kale, is there a misunderstanding?" "Misunderstanding?" Kale smiled calmly and asked back, "Since when can't I enter SHELD's headquarters as I please? How is that casual? You even tore down the front door." The commander didn't dare to say it out loud. He forced a smile and said, "Misunderstanding, this must be a misunderstanding. SHELD's secret project is starting today, so we've entered a state of alert in advance. No one is allowed to enter or leave the headquarters." "Whose order is this?" Kale asked again. The current director of SHELD, Alexander Pierre, the director answered honestly, feeling much more confident. Kale's face was cold as he said, "I'm going to see him and ask him in person when SHELD changed its surname to Alexander." Not only did he not give them any face, he did not even try to hide his cold hostility, causing everyone, including the head of the department, to change their expressions. Many SHELD agents sensed that something was wrong and walked to the side to observe silently. Everything that had happened recently was too strange and suspicious. The former director Nick Frey's betrayal and death, the deputy director Natasha's resignation, the captain of the American team, Steve, was on the run, and Project Insight, which was supposed to benefit the future of society, was launched in advance. Some of them had been suspicious for a long time, but they didn't dare to disobey the orders of their superiors. Now that Kale had come to their headquarters alone, they finally connected the dots. Something was wrong. Something big was going on at SHELD. The director seemed to be under great pressure. Cold sweat soaked the lining of his suit. He gritted his teeth and said, "The director is busy right now, can we do it another day?" Bang. A black shadow flashed forward, and the director's body flew backward. His chest was caved in by at least 5 centimeters, and even his internal organs were shattered in an instant. His eyes were filled with disbelief, regret, and resentment. His consciousness dissipated as his life force was severed. Boom! The director's body flew over the heads of countless agents and smashed into the snow-white wall, turning into a pile of mush wrapped in an expensive suit. Kyle appeared at the spot where the head minister was standing, indifferently maintaining his padding posture. Only when the agent's trembling gaze landed on him did he nonchalantly withdraw his left hand. The director of SHELD, who was second only to the deputy director, was swatted to death like a fly in the headquarters building. The SHELD agents in the lobby were elites from all over the world. They had seen all kinds of situations. But now, all of them felt their scalps go numb. Their bodies and minds were dominated by fear. What was bloodshed? What was cruelty? What was the devil? This was it. Half a century's worth of time was simply too long. When an eagle hibernated for too long, people began to doubt the sharpness of its claws. Plus, the title of Symbol of Peace was so popular that many people in the new era had forgotten about it. They had forgotten that Kale once represented the country's strength and conquest. He was first known for his ability to kill enemies with Hydra. He was the meat grinder that dominated the battlefield in World War II. He was the devil butcher that terrorized the enemy countries. They had also forgotten that Kale never talked reason with people. The strong ones would wait for the card to be drawn, and the weak ones would be killed immediately. And the biggest fist was the absolute truth. Whoever stops me is a Hydra spy. You've already seen what happens to them. Kale said as he walked into the lobby. With every step he took, the agents around him took a step back. Even if they were Hydra spies, they wouldn't die for no reason. The agents blocked the elevator and had nowhere to go. Upstairs, in the director's office, Pierce slumped into a chair and hung up the phone with a busy tone. His face was pale and bloodless. He made 3 calls in succession, namely to the U.S. military, the U.S. Senate, and the United Nations Commission. This was a common method of borrowing power. When faced with a situation that SHELD couldn't handle, he would pull other forces together to put pressure on them. This method had been successful for more than 60 years. Even Director Fry, Captain America, and others had to suffer a lot because of this. They were pursued and wanted for unwarranted crimes. Until today, when he met Kale. Even if he was in a high position, even if he had military power in his hands, even if he had great power, when faced with the young man who invaded the main door, all these methods were ineffective and replaced by a deep sense of powerlessness. I'm already standing at a certain peak, but he's at the end of the starry sky above the peak. Pierre sighed. The phone on the table rang, and he subconsciously picked up the microphone. Bureau Chief. We can't stop him. Listening to the frightened words of the correspondent downstairs, Pierre's fingers gripped the microphone so hard that the ends of his bones turned white. He said tiredly, I know, don't stop him, let him come up. Okay. The correspondent was relieved and hung up the phone. With a bang, Pierre threw the microphone on the table, stood up from the leather office chair, and paced impatiently in the hall like an ant on a hot pan. This lasted for 5 seconds. Wait, I haven't lost yet. Pierre suddenly raised his head, his bloodshot eyes looked out of the floor-to-ceiling window. The helicopter aircraft carrier was still rising into the distance, becoming 3 small cubes in the sky. Operation Insight, the Hydra plan to eliminate human elites and dissidents, was still in progress. As long as the aircraft carrier is still there, I haven't lost. What's more, even if I fail this time, there will be thousands of Hydras in the future. Pierre thought of this, his face regained its calmness, he tidied up his clothes and appearance, returned to the office chair and sat down. At this time, the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the door approached. Pierre's eyes flashed with a hint of fierceness. In this battle, as long as I can force you to make a move, I will not lose anything. Long live Hydra. Chapter 284. SHELD, Headquarters Building, Director's Office. Kale opened the door and walked into the room. When he saw Pierre sitting in the office chair, he couldn't help but smile and say, I thought you would choose to run away. Why would I run away? Pierre responded with a forced smile, cursing in his heart. If he could escape, he would have done so long ago. But in the current situation, running away would only accelerate Hydra's defeat. Everyone could escape, but he couldn't. Once he fell, he would undoubtedly confirm his identity as a Hydra spy, and the rest of the Hydra in SHELD would also be wiped out. Pierce was now bracing himself for the worst. It seems that you are prepared to die. Kale chuckled, walked to the office chair, pulled out the chair and sat down unceremoniously, as if he was the master of the place. The 2 men looked at each other face to face. This was the first time they had met, and maybe the last time. Pierre tried to say with emotion, the symbol of peace, Kale. I grew up listening to your heroic name and historical biography. I only knew about you last night. Nick Fry told me. Kale nodded, telling the truth. Pierre heard the first half of the sentence, and a trace of shame and anger appeared in his eyes. When he heard the second half, his eyelids twitched and his eyes widened in surprise. Yes, Fry is not dead yet. What happened yesterday just made you a little less vigilant. Kale continued, and in the end, he added, I didn't expect you to really be fooled and change your target from him to Steve. Pierre felt that from the moment they met and talked, his strength and IQ had been humiliated by the other party, but he didn't dare to show the slightest dissatisfaction on his face. There was still a trace of luck in his heart, and he asked humbly, "How much do you know?" Cale spread his hands and said, "Not much, just the practical use of the Insight Plan, Hydra's occupation and assimilation of SHELD, and phrase attack by the winter soldiers you sent." Pierre heard this and felt dizzy, and he almost fell on the office chair. That's not much? This was almost all of it, all right? Knowing that his identity was exposed, Pierre's humility and flattery disappeared, and he stared at Cale angrily and said with a sneer, "So? Did you deliberately come here to deal with me? You think too highly of yourself." Cale couldn't help but laugh. He raised a finger, shook it, and said calmly, "I heard that there's a smug clown here, so I came to watch the show and take his life." He talked about killing people so casually, but it was undoubtedly the decree of the Grim Reaper that couldn't be changed. Pierre's face was gloomy and uncertain. Anger, fear, powerlessness, and other complex emotions flashed across his face, and then he raised his head and laughed. "You think you've won, and I've lost. Victory is in your hands, so you came here to humiliate me?" Cale didn't respond, and the look in his eyes as if he was looking at a clown struggling provoked Pierre, who had been tolerating it for a long time. "You're too arrogant and conceited." Pierre no longer suppressed his emotions. He slammed his palm on the table and said loudly, "I know, you must have asked Captain America and the others to rush to where the aircraft carrier is, but you don't know, I sent the winter soldiers in advance, and let him lead people to guard there." He paused and said meaningfully, "I don't have many cards in my hand, but using the winter soldier's card is just enough to fiercely suppress the card you played." Cale nodded, unexpectedly agreeing with his strategic analysis. The winter soldiers and Captain America, the two sides loved and hated each other, and were entangled. To deal with Captain America, sending the winter soldiers was the right thing to do. At least it was a 50-50 chance, enough to delay for a long time. What a pity. As you said, I have many cards in my hand, so I didn't just play the Captain America card. Cale smiled indifferently. Stopping the aircraft carrier was a big deal. How could he put all the burden on Steve's shoulders? The so-called control of the battle situation was to have a suppressive force above the enemy and enough to deal with all the unexpected factors that happened in the process. What did you say? Pierre opened his mouth in disbelief. At this time, on the highway near the viaduct, Steve's group was scattered, hiding behind abandoned cars on the road, avoiding the gunfire suppression from the Hydra-armed team. Steve and Sam were behind the side of the same car, spying on the enemy's encirclement. Sam glanced at the winter soldiers with guns more than 10 meters away and asked in surprise, "Captain, you were talking to the leader just now. Do you know him? He was my former comrade and friend in World War II. Now he should be brainwashed and controlled by the Hydra organization," Steve said with a complicated expression. "I hope he can see that you are an old friend and go easy on you," Sam complained. When he saw the new weapon in the winter soldier's hand, the mechanical metal wings were activated urgently, and at the same time, his face changed dramatically and he shouted, "Get out of the way." Before he finished speaking, he flew into the sky to escape. The next moment, a high-explosive rocket launcher was launched from the winter soldier's hand, dragging the tail flame and bombarding the car in place. The car immediately exploded into a huge burning fireball. Steve reacted very quickly, rolling back on the ground and blocking the admin shield in front of him. The waves of fire and debris hit the shield and separated to both sides. Before he could even catch his breath, the second rocket launcher had already arrived, exploding on his shield. With a shield in hand, Steve was sent flying by the impact of the explosion. He flew in a parabola of more than 10 meters and fell from the viaduct with the same momentum. What the hell, so ruthless, is this really a comrade? Sam in the air saw this scene and was speechless and wanted to find a way to deal with it. Da-da-da. A magazine of bullets was fired accurately, and Sam flew sideways to avoid it. He had no choice but to rise to a safe distance. In the air, in the face of the enemy's sharpshooter, he was simply a live target. The Winter Soldier was expressionless as he withdrew his cold gaze from the air. He threw away the rifle that had run out of ammunition and took the Gatling that the two armed men on the side struggled to carry. With one hand holding the pistol and the lower end of the barrel in the other hand, the Winter Soldier jumped off the viaduct murderously and turned into a war-killing machine to chase after Steve. Whoosh! The round shield rotated lightly and quickly, turning slightly like a dart and hitting the back of the Winter Soldier's head. The Winter Soldier's ears moved slightly. With one hand holding the Gatling, his mechanical left arm slammed back, and the round shield turned back according to its original trajectory. Steve's tall figure jumped out, caught the round shield in the air, put it on his arm, and said in a heavy voice, "Baki, have you really forgotten me?" What responded to him was a barrage of bullets formed into a torrent, sweeping across the cement ground and leaving a terrible scene of potholes. The shield was erected in front of him, and all the bullets were bounced off. Steve faced the flaming Gatling, not retreating but advancing. Chapter 285. The Winter Soldier's face was cold, and he held the heavy steel Gatling in his hand. He ignored the huge recoil and fired all the bullets forward. Alderman's shield blocked all the way. Steve broke through and closed the distance. When he was close, the Winter Soldier picked up the Gatling and threw it at the top of Alderman's head. Caca. As soon as the shield was lifted, Gatling immediately deviated and flew out. But in this way, Steve exposed his unguarded abdomen. The Winter Soldier's eyes were sharp, and he did not miss this opportunity. The mechanical arm showed inhuman explosive power, and his fist was like a cannonball. Fast, accurate, and ruthless. Steve groaned in pain. His abdomen was injured, and he flew back with his shield. He fell to the ground and rolled 10 meters away. The Winter Soldier's body had been modified for a long time, and his physique was not inferior to that of a super soldier. The most important thing was the mechanical left arm, which could be used as the main weapon to hit with several tons of impact force. If this was Captain America, or an ordinary person, one punch would be enough to kill him. Even so, Steve's forehead was still covered with cold sweat. He covered his abdomen with one hand and held the shield with the other to get up. But once the Winter Soldier attacked, he would not show any mercy. There was a whistling sound in his ears, and Steve did not bother to get up. He took the initiative to fall and continued to roll back. As soon as he made this move, the Winter Soldier jumped down from the sky, and his leather boots trampled on the place where he was originally standing. The mechanical left arm reflected a cold light in the sun, and the clenched left fist smashed forward. Bang! Steve kept rolling and dodging, and the metal left fist brushed past his body and fell on the hard concrete ground made by the Winter Soldier. In an instant, spiderweb-shaped cracks with a diameter of 1 meter appeared. That was close. Steve gritted his teeth, rolled away, and threw out the round shield again. The shield spun and whistled through the air, flying straight toward the Winter Soldier's neck. The Winter Soldier raised his eyes coldly. His left arm, which was still clenched and pressed against the ground a moment ago, raised quickly like lightning, and slapped the oncoming shield with a reaction far faster than others. The shield buzzed, and this time it did not return the way it came. It flew askew to the side and plunged straight into the carriage of an abandoned bus on the side of the road. Steve lost his shield and finally got a chance to breathe. He quickly got up with his hands on the ground. He didn't retreat. Instead, he moved his body slightly and spat out a mouthful of bloody phlegm. He got into a posture ready for close combat and said with great pride, "You know, I can still fight like this for a day and night." Hearing this sentence, the Winter Soldier paused for half a second, and then quickly dissipated, and returned to his original indifference. "Baki, come on. I'll make you think of me." Steve pointed at the winter soldier who was 5 meters away and said straightforwardly with his left fist. The winter soldier did not speak, he waved his hand and waved his hand. As if in accordance with his order, a brand new submachine gun with a full magazine was thrown from the back of the group of accomplices. "You've really changed. You can't play like this, right?" Steve smiled bitterly and did not dare to stay any longer. He turned and ran in the direction of the nearby bunker. Just as he quickly rushed out a few meters, the bullets chased after him. "Can you come over and help?" Natasha, not far away, shouted loudly. She was fighting fiercely with 4 or 5 armed soldiers in close combat. Her bright red hair was dancing like flames, and her vigorous figure was fierce and beautiful. "I can't get away from here," Steve responded helplessly. His back was against an abandoned yellow car, and the bullets had already turned the other side of the car into a sieve. "Captain, there are more armed vehicles coming this way. There is less than half a minute left." Falcon Sam hovered at a low altitude of tens of meters, looking at the 2 suppressed people below. He noticed the armed vehicles speeding on the road further away and could not help but shout a warning. "It's really troublesome now." Steve whispered, looked up at the helicarrier that was rising higher and higher, and ordered, "Don't worry about us. You go to the helicarrier first. Natasha and I will be there later." "Okay." Sam nodded, and his mechanical wings trembled slightly. He rushed straight into the sky like a goshawk and quickly flew to the helicarrier a few miles away. However, his departure officially announced that Steve and Natasha were in a situation where they were trapped together. The bullets nearby were still suppressing them, and the enemy's car horn in the distance was close to their ears. Steve leaned against the car, and his mind was quickly thinking about countermeasures. In the end, he sighed in frustration. "We may not be able to escape." In the current situation, there was no room for a comeback. "Are you giving up, Captain?" Next to him, a mechanical voice suddenly sounded. "Of course not." Steve answered subconsciously. Suddenly, he was stunned. He looked sideways and saw a little robot sitting in the back seat of the car. Steve asked curiously, "Who are you?" "My name is Vice." The little robot showed a row of steel teeth and said, "I was sent by Master Kale to help you." "I'm a cheat." "Vice, a cheat?" Steve was a little confused, but when he heard that it was sent by Kale, his face was filled with joy, and he let out a long sigh of relief. If Kale was helping, he would definitely be reliable. "There's no time to explain. Get in the car," Vice said coldly. "Get in the car?" Steve blinked, and looked at the abandoned yellow car that was riddled with bullet holes. He forced himself to open the door and sit in the driver's seat. "Please fasten your seatbelt." Vice snapped his fingers. His actions and tone were very similar to Kale's. Steve felt that he was in a stolen car, and he could only silently fasten his seatbelt. Vice took out a krypton core from somewhere. He held it with both hands, opened his mouth, and swallowed it down. "Very good. The power is ready. Prepare to activate the transformation mode." He suddenly jumped into the passenger seat. His body was covered in electric light, and his mechanical hands were used as probes to insert into the driving instrument. Mechanical assimilation. Transformation mode. Outside the abandoned car, the winter soldier threw away the empty magazine and the gun with the hot muzzle. Just as he was about to call someone to switch to the rocket launcher, an armed vehicle approached from behind. "Stop. Put your hands on your head and squat down." Immediately, a few teams of agents got out of the car and surrounded Natasha, who had just knocked down a few armed men. Natasha snorted coldly. Under the aim of more than 10 guns, she had no choice but to surrender and squat down. Nearly 10 armed vehicles that had arrived stopped and surrounded the abandoned yellow car. Many agents swarmed out of the vehicles and aimed their guns at the car. The captain of the agents warned coldly, "Get out of the car. If you don't get out of the car, we'll shoot." But no one answered. The scene was silent. Just as the captain of the agents couldn't take it anymore, the abandoned car vibrated slightly. The intact taillights lit up, and passionate and trendy electronic music floated out of the car. At this moment, they were playing music. Dozens of elite agents, Hydra members, and even the Winter Soldier were stunned. Their brains stopped working for a moment. "Shoot!" The captain of the agents roared angrily. Chapter 286. What is Steve doing? Hearing the music from the car, Natasha, who was handcuffed, felt incredulous. When the captain of the agents gave the order to fire, her expression changed drastically. Bang, bang, bang. The agents fired in unison, and the bullets formed a dense rain of bullets, covering the small yellow car tightly. At the same time, a white electric current was transmitted from the inside to the outside, covering the damaged car with a sizzling sound. In just a short moment, the small yellow car changed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The front of the car suddenly lifted up, the body of the car mechanically decomposed and expanded, the four tires shrunk inwards, and the metal parts stretched out like four limbs. It was obviously an ordinary abandoned car, but it displayed a high-tech level of precision deformation, and was quickly reassembled in front of the agent's eyes. Clang, clang, clang. The bullets landed densely on the shell of the transforming machine, and sparks flew everywhere, leaving only a few light white bullet marks. At this time, the small yellow car finally completed its final transformation. My God, what kind of mechanical monster is this? Alien creature? Robot giant? The agents gasped and raised their heads in shock. They looked up at the huge metallic monster in front of them, and their double scripts could not help but take a few steps back. It was a steel giant standing on two legs, and it was more than 8 meters tall. Its hands with muzzles were placed on its waist, and a wing-like engine was spread out from its back. Its shell was still the original yellow paint of the car, and its mechanical eyes were looking around at everyone. What's going on? They were not the only ones who were shocked. Steve, who was sitting in the car seat in the chest of the steel robot, was also dumbfounded. Awesome, right? Vice's proud voice was heard, and it explained, "This is the master's idea, and also a new transformation ability that Tawny and I discovered after a long period of learning how to modify armor. With enough energy, it can temporarily assimilate vehicles, helicopters, and other machinery into a part of the body, and then perform a powerful giant transformation. This is the transformer mode." Vice explained the theory excitedly. This was also the first time it had performed such a large-scale transformation of armor. Cool. How do we operate it? Are there any weapons? Steve rubbed his palms and asked eagerly. Voice control. As for weapons, there are simple cannons. Vice raised his left hand as he spoke. There was a cannon on his arm, and the black muzzle was aimed at the vehicles and agents in front of him. Boom! A powerful roar rang out and a laser round was fired out, blasting an armored vehicle into the air. It transformed into a blazing fireball. Several agents around him screamed and fell to the ground with serious injuries. The aftermath of the explosion, and the flames wreaked havoc. Gravel and dust flew everywhere. This power. Steve's jaw dropped. Not bad, but it consumes too much energy, Vice said excitedly. If this cannon was switched to Krypton energy, it would cost more than $10,000. Ordinary people would not be able to afford this burning speed. However, Kale was not short of money. Fire! The captain of the agents roared. Immediately after, another cannon round landed at his feet and blasted his body into ashes. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered everywhere like rain. Explosions are art. Vice shouted excitedly. He felt that some of his natural instincts had been awakened. Well done. But don't focus on killing the enemy. Save some energy and go save Natasha first. Oh, and don't forget my shield, Steve said calmly. No problem. Weiss nodded in agreement. He ignored all the bullets and covered a distance of 6 to 7 meters with each step. He held the shield in his hand and sped up towards Natasha. Crack! The armored vehicle that was blocking the way was turned into a pile of scrap metal by Weiss's foot. The agents retreated and fled in all directions. Seeing the mechanical monster running towards them, several agents who were holding Natasha fled in fear. The only remaining agent gritted his teeth and raised his gun, roaring as he pulled the trigger to shoot. You overestimate yourself. Weiss sneered. He rushed forward and kicked the agent. The agent immediately flew out like a rubber ball. His body flew in a perfect parabola and he died in the air. He gently grabbed Natasha from the ground and held her together with the shield in his hand. Just as he finished this action, a rocket shot over from the side, hitting the robot's left shoulder and exploding into a ball of fire. Under the power of a modern rocket, the left shoulder of Weiss's giant mechanical body finally cracked open. Damn it! Weiss turned around angrily and saw the Winter Soldier standing on top of an armored vehicle with a rocket launcher 20 meters away. He was looking at them coldly. Baki. Steve was also helpless. He urged, ignore him. Let's hurry to the aircraft carrier. Sam is waiting for us. We won't be able to stop Project Insight if we're late. Okay. Weiss thought for a while and fired 2 shells at the area where the Winter Soldier was. Several armored vehicles were shattered and exploded, turning the road into a raging sea of fire. This greatly affected the pursuit of the agents. Weiss continued to move forward. The earth trembled slightly. After walking on the road, they rushed in the direction of the aircraft carrier. 10 seconds later. In the sea of fire, screams continued. With the heavy roar of the braking engine, a cool black and gold motorcycle accelerated and rushed out. The Winter Soldier's eyes were cold as he locked onto the conspicuous yellow deformation machine. He sped up the motorcycle and chased after it. Until they were far away. An agent took off his burned clothes and withdrew from the sea of fire. After hesitating, he took out his satellite communicator and dialed. On the other side. The director's office of SHELD. The phone on the desk rang, causing Kale and Pierre to look at it. The scene was silent and strange. Pick it up, Kale said. Pierre originally wanted to pick it up. After Kale gave his permission, he quickly picked up the phone and put his hand close to his ear. It's me. The agent didn't hide anything. He eagerly recounted what he had witnessed and encountered earlier. Okay, I got it. Pierce put down the microphone. His originally gloomy face had turned ashen and ugly. It seems that my card won. Kale smiled. After he became a god, his 5 senses were so sharp that no matter how Pierre blocked it, he could hear every word of the conversation at this distance. But even if he didn't listen, he knew the outcome. If the previous steel mode of Weiss was still in an awkward situation where it was inferior to the Iron Man Mark armor, then the current Transformer mode was completely on the technological path of its own evolution. There was no need to spend time building it. They only needed to know the structure of the parts, assimilate the cars, fighters, and even interstellar spaceships that they could come into contact with, and use them as materials to transform and shape on the spot. This was the real way of fighting Weiss. Chapter 287. With the Weiss around, Steve and the others could easily enter the helicarrier. No matter how strong the Winter Soldiers were, they only had 2 hands. They couldn't stop them from destroying Project Insight. It could be said that the Weiss sent by Kale destroyed the original balance of power and completely reversed the battle situation in New York. General. The victory was set. Kale crossed his legs and calmly looked at the pale Pierre in front of him. He asked, "Do you have anything else to say?" "What else do I have to say now?" "You won again this time." Pierre smiled sadly. After a moment of silence, he adjusted his tie and clothes and said calmly, "But this battle isn't over yet. One of Hydra's heads has been cut off, but a second head will grow. Even if you kill me today and stop Project Insight, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." What he said was the same as Red Skull Schmidt, who was at the end of his road in 1944. This was the strength of the Hydra organization. Pervasive infiltration, the ability to tolerate and steal growth, and the organization's dogma and beliefs that were comparable to brainwashing. "Who said I'm going to kill you? The show isn't over yet." Kale chuckled. His fingers tapped on the table as he said meaningfully, "Don't worry, wait a little longer. There might be a call later." Pierre's pupils constricted when he heard this. An ominous premonition surged in his heart. At this moment, around the world, in some unknown hidden corners, local wars were unfolding. South of Iraq, under the remote mountains, a large base fortress was hidden in the dense forest and was equipped with various high-tech concealment devices. No one had explored this place for decades. It was only today that the technological restriction and the silence of the forest were finally broken. Boom! A black gold Eagle space warship broke into the forest and fired at the closed fortress door of the large base. Under the attack of the extraterrestrial powerful laser cannon, the protective shield only lasted for half a second before it was on the verge of collapse. Countless Hydra members jumped out in fear, trying to defend and counterattack with firearms and artillery shells. The space warship hovered at a low altitude. The super-advanced metal shell ignored the attacks of modern firearms and blocked the space above the fortress door to unleash its energy cannon fire to its heart's content until the large base was flattened into a sea of fire. How exciting! Her beautiful eyes reflected the fire below. Luna sat in the pilot's seat of the fighter. Her tongue licked her sexy lips, and her hands held the manual device that controlled the fighter's cannon. Yutong, who was in the front passenger seat, said softly, "That's enough. Let's change to the next target." "Got it." Luna flicked her beautiful hair and operated the pilot instrument. The fighter stopped and roared into the distance, leaving behind a piece of burnt earth that had suffered a destructive blow. At the bottom of a valley on the outskirts of Austria. There was also a large hidden base here. Along with the subtle sound of an engine and light, an Iron Man wearing high-tech armor entered the sky above this area. "Try this." Tawny hovered in the air, and the shells on his shoulders opened. Dozens of small artillery shells spewed out smoke and directly bombarded the top of the base building. There was a rumbling sound, and the fire covered the sky above the fortress. However, after the explosion and smoke dissipated, the building was still standing tall without any damage, and a translucent energy shield was revealed. Seeing this, Tawny said in a low voice, "So troublesome. Jarvis, help me find a breakthrough." "Yes, sir," Jarvis answered. However, before it could analyze, a flying creature swept past the Iron Man and flew straight to the fortress building. "That's..." Tawny opened his eyes wide. Through the detection instrument, he saw that it was a combination of two strange monsters. A tall black horse with flames under its feet galloped, and a 3-meter-tall green flame giant sat on its back, holding a broken battle axe in its hand. The flaming horse carried hellfire and ran at high speed in the air, leaving a series of flame marks behind. When it reached the sky above Hydra's base, hellfire jumped from the horse's back and fell from the sky, smashing into the energy shield that was strong enough to resist small missiles. As soon as the energy shield met the green flames, it immediately tore a hole, and the steel plate on the top of the building melted with a sizzling sound as it touched the green flames. Hellfire sat straight inside the heavily protected base. Jarvis said leisurely, "Sir, it seems that there's no need to find a breakthrough." Tawny was a little confused for a moment and shook his head helplessly. What kind of monsters are in Godfather's family? Let's leave this place to it. Jarvis, switch to the next closest target base. Jarvis set up the navigation and quickly sent out a prompt, "Sir, the nearest target base probably doesn't need our help." Why, that should also be a large base. Tawny was stunned, then suddenly thought of something and asked, "Who's there now?" "Bruce Banner," Jarvis replied. "Then forget it." Tawny shrunk his neck, and the image of Hulk roaring madly appeared in his mind. He couldn't help but say with lingering fear, "Switch to the next target base." The German border, about 30 kilometers away from the border town. Jarvis immediately adjusted the navigation and gave the best flight route. "Okay, let's fight to our heart's content today." Tawny put his arms together, and the engines of his palms and feet exploded, breaking through the supersonic speed in an instant and leaving. Hydra's large bases had high-end combat personnel who specialized in solving the problem. At the same time, K2, wearing a black leather jacket and a devil mask, led a team of affiliated family forces and underground organizations to carry out a surprise attack on more small and medium-sized Hydra bases. General Thunderbolt and Colonel Ross did not send out their troops. In order to avoid having too many people in the army, they only issued a one-sided order to temporarily suppress some of the information that was sent to the higher-ups. This made the hidden war in the underground world even more hidden and perfect. Yes, it was perfect. This was a textbook annihilation assault. The Hydra bases, which grew in the dark like tumors on the earth, suffered heavy blows one by one at the same time and quietly fell and were destroyed. SHELD, Headquarters, Director's Office. From just now to now, in just 10 minutes, more than a dozen phone calls came in. Pierre picked up the phone, listened, hung up, and picked up again, constantly repeating this action. The information that was transmitted to him was, without exception, almost the same. In the end, the phone rang again. Pierre stopped answering, his body slumped in the chair, his eyes were bloodshot, and his lips were tightly pursed. "It's okay. Even if Hydra's head is chopped off, it will grow back." Kyle shrugged and comforted him, which was rare of him. Pierre's eyes widened, and he almost vomited blood. Chapter 288. One of Hydra's heads was cut off, but this time all 9 heads were cut off. Judging from the phone call he just received, at least half of the bases hidden in the world's underground were attacked by foreign enemies at the same time. The initial estimate was that the losses were unimaginable, and at least tens of thousands of people's lives were wiped out. And the manipulator boss behind the scenes, at this moment, was sitting in the reception chair in front of him, crossing his legs and watching him make a fool of himself. This was simply too arrogant, too overbearing, too inhumane, too callous and heartless. Pierre's mind was blank, shocked and angry, his body was trembling slightly, and he didn't know how to describe this behavior. Hydra, which had always been good at plotting and doing bad things, would have a day when they were pushed to the ground and bullied. The phone on the desk stopped ringing, and then it rang again, and there was no sign of it stopping at all. "Why aren't you answering the phone? You didn't expect your base to be gone." Kale didn't let go of the opportunity to tease him, and his face was full of surprise. Pierre gritted his teeth and sighed weakly. "When did you start the preparations?" "In the old military base, after the scientist got the address files of many of your bases from the storage device of the Avatar, I had this idea," Kale said and spread out his hands, "but at that time, it wasn't the best time to attack. The best time was when the aircraft carrier was in the air and Project Insight was launched." "I understand. Against a monster like you, we Hydra lost." Pierre immediately understood and smiled bitterly. Once Hydra placed the hope of turning the tables on the aircraft carrier and Project Insight, the defense and vigilance of its own bases would be reduced to the lowest level for a short time. This was a blind spot in common sense. After all, if it was anyone else, they would concentrate their forces to first stop the dangerous Project Insight. Only Kale was so ambitious that he divided the forces he could gather into several parts, only letting Steve and a few others stop the aircraft carrier, and sent other forces to attack the Hydra bases. It doesn't matter. Your Hydra heads will grow back even if they're gone. Kale said with a smile. Can you not talk about my head? Pierre's mouth twitched as he looked at him helplessly. This was originally a slogan, but now it had become a joke. The damage suffered by Hydra this time was comparable to the fiasco during World War II. After the disappearance of Red Skull, Hydra completely withdrew from the world stage and lost the power to threaten the Earth. The remnants hid in the dark for more than half a century and finally made some progress with the help of SHELD. But just as he was about to stand up again, he was beaten back to his original state. The Hydra organization is really going to die this time. The more Pierre thought about it, the more unwilling he became. His face turned red, and he finally heaved a long sigh. What a pity. In 1944, no matter what, Schmidt should have gotten rid of you sooner. He should have just dropped a nuclear bomb on the recruit base and buried you and Captain America. Who would have thought that the Hydra organization that caused world panic and infiltrated a wide range of people would be destroyed in the hands of two recruits who were born in the same barracks? Is the Schmidt you're talking about the guy who was chased by me for dozens of kilometers with a long sword? As for the nuclear bomb, I seem to have experienced it personally. Kale smiled indifferently, stood up from the chair, looked down at Pierre, and said inexplicably, still not giving up? Since you've called them to the door, you might as well call them in. Pierre's face changed and he no longer hesitated. He pressed the invisible button under the table. The mechanism clicked and a crack opened on the smooth ground. Pierre and his chair fell and shrank into the depression. At the same time, gunshots rang out from outside the door. In the blink of an eye, the door of the office was shot into a sieve, and the rain of bullets covered everything in the office, trying to obliterate the creatures inside. Kale snorted coldly, the golden pupils in his eyes flashed, and a nearly transparent golden flame rose from the surface of his body, majestic, sacred, and extremely hot. A heatwave hit. The hot wind blew countless pieces of paper into the air and burned them to ashes. The temperature in the room soared, and the nearby tables and chairs immediately burst into flames. Countless bullets melted into molten iron before they could get within half a meter of Kale, and fell to the floor with a sizzling sound. Stop him. The door shattered and collapsed, and a large group of SHELD agents and armed personnel, armed with all kinds of high-tech and firearms, surged and occupied nearly half of the office area, staring at Kale as if they were facing a great enemy. The only enemy, and also the strongest enemy. You overestimate yourself. Kale sneered, knowing that Pierre had sacrificed himself to place these men of sacrifice in SHELD, to buy him time to escape. But he didn't care. As long as a member of Hydra appeared today, they would all die. The more the better. Kale ignored the threats of the armed personnel and stepped toward the door. His actions made the expressions of countless people in the room change. Stop right there. The leader shouted in horror. I'll stop. Kale smiled and took a heavy step forward, activating the fire god's power and gravitational traction at the same time. All of you, kneel down. The deterrence of the Protoss bloodline belonging to the high-dimensional life form, and the gravitational force field that increased gravity by more than 10 times, seemed to be two unrelated abilities, but when used together, they immediately displayed an unexpected and remarkable effect. Buzz, with Kale as the center, an invisible domineering aura rippled out, and like transparent waves of water, suddenly swept across the surroundings, and everything in the office fell into a temporary standstill in an instant. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. More than a dozen armed men knelt down on the ground, their heads, elbows, and knees heavily pressed against the floor. Their bodies trembled as they bent over, unable to get up, and they let out stuttering, terrified, and wailing. Kale continued to move forward, not even looking at them, until he passed by them and left. This was a pressure that was enough to disorder the mind and body, equivalent to his unique personal domain, but this pressure was only effective on ordinary people. Until Kale walked out of the door. A few seconds later, more than a dozen armed personnel collapsed to the ground, sweating profusely, exhausted, and panting heavily, their eyes still full of fear. They were not on the same level. "Wait, my back is on fire, someone help me put it out," an armed personnel shouted in panic, and the combat suit on his back ignited in flames. He rolled on the floor frantically, but the more he rolled, the more the golden-red flames burned until his body turned into a fireball. "My clothes are on fire too. Stay away from me, don't come to me." By the time they noticed that there were flames on everyone's body, it was already too late. The golden flames consciously wrapped around the body, and obviously would not be extinguished until the bones were burned. If you want to burn, burn more thoroughly. Kale walked in the corridor, listening to the faint screams and cries behind him, and continued to walk toward the elevator with an expressionless face. This fire had just begun to burn. Chapter 289. SHELD-HQ. Pierre was obviously forced into a dead end. After learning that his bases had been destroyed, he was so angry that he wanted to cut off all means of retreat. Emergency alert. Kale, the symbol of peace, has invaded SHELD-HQ. He is trying to kill Director Pierre and sabotage Project Insight. All agents are to intercept him at the stairs. All weapons and emergency measures are allowed. I repeat, the target is Kale, the symbol of peace. The alarm in the HQ suddenly sounded and echoed loudly in every corner of the building. It was clearly heard by everyone in the HQ. The technicians and elite agents were shocked. They all stopped what they were doing. Some of them even thought that they had heard wrong. The halls and offices on each floor were silent for a few seconds. Then, they started to discuss fiercely. Crazy. Really crazy. This time, the number one enemy SHELD was targeting was the symbol of peace. It was like a son was going to beat his father. Many people felt that their brains were not enough to process what was going on. What are you waiting for? Didn't you hear the order? Hurry up and get moving. Bring your weapons and follow me. Some of the agents didn't hesitate too much. Their actions were swift and decisive. They followed the orders of the alarm and put on their weapons and equipment. They raised their arms and shouted, stirring up the atmosphere as they rushed towards the stairs. Targeting the symbol of peace? What kind of joke is this? A female agent muttered to herself. She looked at the agents who were moving quickly and couldn't help but tighten her grip on the gun in her hand. If the breakup between S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America has made many agents suspicious, then the breakup between S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America has made many agents suspicious. But now, SHELD was going to target the symbol of peace. This completely woke some people up. It was time to choose a side. Should they continue to believe in their superiors, or should they choose to believe in the symbol of peace? This multiple-choice question seemed very weird and funny. However, all New Yorkers had already given the answer a long time ago. The elevator's main gate had been turned off. It couldn't be used normally. Kale didn't care. He directly chose to take the stairs. He started from the 36th floor, which was close to the top, and walked down the stairs step by step. The screams in the director's office were still ringing in his ears. Dense and noisy footsteps came from the stairs in front of him. All of you, go. The symbol of peace must be killed. A group of armed agents rushed out of the building and surrounded the staircase. When they saw Kale, they pulled the trigger and fired at him with their rifles. From time to time, there were also smoke bombs, flashing lights, and high-explosive grenades mixed in. Boom! Boom! The headquarters of SHELD seemed to be facing demolition. The entire building was shaking non-stop, and on the top floor, the door and the floor-to-ceiling windows were shattered by the violent shockwaves. Now that Hydra's real base is gone, these Hydra spies disguised as SHELD agents are determined to kill Kale with bloodshot eyes, and regardless of the damage to the SHELD headquarters, they use all their weapons to kill Kale on the spot. They were determined to be ruthless. Some of them even threw high-explosive grenades a few meters away, disregarding the safety of themselves and their teammates. The effect was obvious. The original staircase was directly blown up. Billowing smoke filled the interior space of the top floor, and ashes symbolizing death sprinkled down. The surviving agents who launched the attack put on protective headgear, feeling uneasy, and began to scan with the infrared line equipped with firearms. The target is gone. Is he dead? How is that possible? The opponent is. Their conversation stopped abruptly. In the corridor filled with thick black smoke, a dark and tall humanoid figure gradually emerged. The narrow red eyes glowed faintly, filled with inhuman emotions such as brutality, killing, coldness, and wildness. Venom, fully covered. A bunch of trash, you want to kill me like this? The dark demon made a hoarse voice, grinned slightly, and took a big step forward. The wild and tall dark body brought an extraordinary impact to people's vision. The agents gasped, a chill ran down their spines, and their hands holding the guns trembled. Demon, it's that demon. One of the agents said in horror. In the data files of the Hydra organization, there was a description of the reasons for the fiasco of World War II. Among them, there was a record of the number one enemy, Kale. During the night of the battle, that man would transform into a black demon with an immortal body and wings. His strength and speed were far beyond that of ordinary people. He was a monster that could only give up on resisting. Monster, go to hell. Shrouded in the fog of fear, someone in the group of agents couldn't help but shout. Then, a high-explosive grenade was thrown out, smashing directly into the dark demon's face. Kale didn't dodge. He opened his ferocious mouth, and under the incredulous eyes of the agents, he bit down on the incoming high-explosive grenade. Boom! The powerful explosion exploded in his mouth. Kale smacked his mouth, unharmed, and puffed out a few rings of black smoke. Monster, this is a real monster. The agents who witnessed this scene were desperate, and their fighting spirit was gone. Driven by the fear in their hearts, they threw away their guns and turned to escape downstairs. Where do you think you're going? All of you, stay here. Kyle grinned maliciously. A wave of pressure rose from his body, exploding outwards in a substantial manner. The agents who were still within a 10-meter radius felt as if their legs were filled with lead. They staggered forward and fell to the ground. Once they lowered their heads, they could no longer raise them. Die. Kale strode forward, and from his tall and strong body, several dark and tough tentacles shot out like bullets. The tentacles pierced the heads of the agents in an instant, and their bodies were strung together. Kale pulled the tentacles and dragged the corpses down the broken stairs, leaving behind rows of blood-stained steps. On the lower floors, a new team of agents poured out, and a new round of fighting began. Kale didn't refuse any of them. From the top of the building to the bottom, the corpses were strung together with a tentacle as a long rope. On the 36 floors, there was a local battle on almost every floor, but they all came to an end in a short period of time. Until they arrived downstairs. The main hall on the first floor was quiet. When Kale walked out of the stairs, he looked up and saw nearly 100 agents standing in place. These agents didn't have the slightest intention to fight. After seeing Kale covered in venom, they hurriedly bowed and saluted, respectfully greeting him and saying, "Hello, Chief Consultant." Chief Consultant? Kale was slightly taken aback, and suddenly remembered that during World War II, when he first built SHELD, he created the nominal duty of chief consultant of SHELD to avoid trouble. Your reaction is quite fast, otherwise, would have killed them all as Hydra spies. Kale glanced around the hall, and under the murderous gaze of his red eyes, the agents on the field bowed their heads in fear. I'll leave these to you. I'll go after Alexander Pierre of the Hydra organization. Kale ordered, his left hand swung forward, and the end of the tentacle dragged out a pile of corpses from the staircase. There were also nearly 100 special agents in combat suits. Their chests and heads were tied together with holes. Blood was still dripping from the wounds. Chapter 290. SHELD Headquarters. The main hall of the building was dead silent. There was only the creepy rustling sound of hair, muscles, and bones rubbing against the floor. There was also the dripping sound of blood flowing down the stairs. The agents on the scene were all pale. They were too shocked to speak. Some of the researchers immediately bent over and vomited. How could they describe the scene in front of them? It would be too simple to call it a massacre. Hundreds of corpses that had not yet fully stiffened were tied together by tentacles as if they were chickens and ducks. They were pulled from the 36th floor all the way to the first floor. Blood washed the SHELD headquarters. The entire building was dyed blood red. It was filled with the disgusting smell of blood. No matter what the reason was, this was an inhumane massacre. If there was a video of it and it was released, it would undoubtedly cause great panic in the civilized society. What's more, the one who did it was a legendary hero who was promoted as a symbol of peace, who loved and defended peace. If he was not careful, Kale might even lose his reputation in this battle and bear the infamy of a ruthless butcher. Kale obviously thought of this, but he did not take it to heart. SHELD agents? So what if he killed them? He did not need to give anyone an explanation. Where's Alexander Pierre? Kyle had yet to recover from being completely covered by the venom. He opened his mouth ferociously, exhaling hot air as he coldly asked. An agent as a representative shuddered and quickly replied. After the director hurried downstairs and issued the arrest warrant, he left in a helicopter. He said that he would personally board the aircraft carrier to complete the insight plan. Okay, I'll go kill him now. Kale whispered. He did not care about the feelings of others. He twitched and pulled back the dark tentacles covered in blood, leaving behind a pile of broken corpses with fatal wounds. That's right. From now on, Alexander Pierre is no longer the director of SHELD. Also, there must be a Hydra spy among you people. From now on, no one is allowed to leave the headquarters. Kale said one last sentence as he walked out of the door. Wide and long dark wings covered in scales spread out from his back. He squatted down slightly, and his legs were like taut springs. With one leap, he leaped more than 20 meters. When he reached the highest point, Kale flapped his wings, and a hurricane exploded in the air. His tall body turned into a black stream of light, and circles of white waves appeared on the ground. He flew toward the aircraft carrier at supersonic speed. After Kale left, the fog of fear that shrouded the headquarters of SHELD finally dispersed. Countless people on the first floor heaved a sigh of relief as they stared at the pile of corpses in the middle of the main hall with lingering fear. Is that murderous monster really a symbol of peace? Someone asked with a trembling voice. The agents all fell silent. Of course, it was a symbol of peace, but who would dare to blame this inhumane slaughter on the legendary heroes? Wasn't this a complete breakdown of his image? There is no doubt that it is the symbol of peace, Kale, the hero who stopped Hydra and accelerated the end of World War II. A weak but steady voice suddenly sounded from the door of the building. Everyone looked toward the source of the voice and saw a female agent pushing a metal wheelchair into the hall. On the wheelchair was a middle-aged black man with a bald head and bandages all over his body. His dark and ferocious face was majestic. Ex-director. Mr. Nick Fry. The agents were pleasantly surprised and quickly bowed in unison. Greetings, ex-director. All right, this farce should be over. Fry scanned the messy hall with his single eye, and looked at the tragic corpses. He sighed and said, I can testify that Project Insight is a conspiracy that caused a catastrophe in the human world. Alexander Pierre is a Hydra spy. Captain Steve and Deputy Director Natasha are innocent. More than half of SHELD are infiltrated by Hydra spies. As soon as he finished speaking, the agents were horrified. They put their hands on the handles of their guns and vigilantly guarded against the agents around them. But even if that's the case, Kyle's heroic actions are too. A researcher collapsed on the ground and vomited. Even though he knew the truth, he still couldn't accept the fact that Kyle had carried out such a cruel massacre without even verifying his identity. Whether you accept it or not, this is Kyle's modus operandi. Using violence to curb violence. Fry shook his head and said, otherwise, how do you think he got his title as the symbol of peace? Did he get it by reasoning with his enemies? This is a legendary throne built by piling up corpses. This was the biggest reason why he had been hesitant and didn't want Kale to solve the internal conflict in SHELD. Fry knew Kale very well. He had no worries. As long as one stood on the opposite side of him, regardless of whether one's identity was good or bad, one would welcome the end of destruction. His killing intent was very pure. Most of the time, he didn't kill people out of emotion. It was like opening the lid of a can. He would open it simply because he wanted to drink the drink inside. He was the one who had the least baggage of a hero. He did what he wanted and did what he wanted. He didn't care about what other people thought of him. He never thought of himself as the so-called symbol of peace. He never thought about laws, morals, human nature, and so on. He didn't need to think about them. He would only do what he thought was right. This was Kale, the lawless and legendary hero. The hall fell into silence again. Some of the agents had some understanding in their eyes. The height that Kale stood at could no longer be considered a superhero. He was more like an emotionless god. When he dealt with the wrong things on Earth, he would completely erase and change them. Many people couldn't accept such cruel methods. Everything that happened in SHELD today is classified as top secret. No one is allowed to leak it. Starting from the source code, delete all the footage from today's floor and format it. Fry said with a cold face. Kale didn't care, but that didn't mean that he didn't care. Fry continued, also, everyone put down their weapons. No one is allowed to hold weapons until the battle over at the helicarrier is over. Since they had already come to this point, they would wash SHELD clean with blood. They would burn it back to its original appearance, free of impurities and pollution. 1,000 meters above the center of New York City. 3 helicarriers formed a triangle. They were 50 meters apart and hovered in the air. It was a bit like 3 steel islands floating in the ocean. At this moment, a fierce chase was taking place on the top deck of one of the helicarriers. A huge yellow transforming robot was running for its life with Natasha in its hand. More than a dozen single fighter jets buzzed like bees out of a hive. They chased after the giant robot relentlessly. Come and catch me. If you catch me, I'll let you. He he he. As the Vice ran, it turned its head and used a loudspeaker to issue a powerful group taunt. Chapter 291. As soon as Vice finished his sarcasm, the fighter jet chased after them even more closely. The distance between the two sides was slowly closing in. However, even when they were within 50 meters of each other, the fighter jet still didn't attack with its hot weapons, as if it was worried about something. Let me tell you. There's a 99% chance that they won't launch a missile. We're on a helicarrier right now. If the helicarrier is destroyed, it will indirectly destroy the Insight plan. Weiss, who had transformed into a transformer, was fearless. He converted the radio frequency into a normal voice and communicated with Steve, who was in the pilot's seat, and Natasha, who was on his palm. You make it sound like we're the villains, Natasha retorted angrily. Destroying the helicarrier is indeed a solution, but the city of New York is right below us. If 3 helicarriers crash, it will still be a catastrophe. Steve shook his head and analyzed calmly. I know, no wonder Master said you. Weiss started to argue and stopped halfway. It should be said that Steve was indeed a hero with a sense of humanity and justice. He always put the safety of human beings first in everything he did and took action. Compared to Kyle, who used violence to curb violence, Steve was simply the opposite of the straightforward Kyle. Weiss' mobile phone was made by Howard, the Tinder life was given by Cale, and the armor knowledge was taught by Tawny. The data code of its mechanical soul had been deeply imprinted with the 3 people's values and values. It felt like there was nothing that money and power couldn't solve. If there was, then it would add more money and increase its power. Weiss was still thinking when it heard the sound of air turbulence from the back of its head. The smart system's alarm sounded loudly. Its huge mechanical body curled up into a ball, and with quick reflexes, it did a gorgeous roll on the spot. Boom! A missile with a blazing tail flew over Weiss' head and landed on the deck of the helicarrier not far away. The ground exploded into a terrifying wave of dust and fire. Weiss quickly stood up and opened its mechanical palms. Natasha, who was kneeling on one knee, stood up and straightened her chest. The fire in front of her was reflected in her beautiful eyes. Her bright red short hair was blown up by the shockwave caused by the explosion. Natasha raised her eyebrows and said to Weiss, "Your 1% chance happened. They really launched the missile without caring about the safety of the helicarrier." "It's not them, it's him," Weiss refuted. A silver fighter jet rushed at the front of the fleet. The cockpit could be seen through the windshield. The pilot was a blond young man with a metal left arm. Steve also saw this scene through the video feed. He couldn't help but say softly, "It's Baki." He's still caught up. Weiss didn't care so much. He turned around and raised his mechanical arm. The cannon on his left hand charged for a short while and fired a huge laser bullet. The silver fighter jet was alerted and dodged to the side like an eagle. The laser bullet grazed the wing and missed, but it hit another fighter at the back, accidentally destroying it on the spot. The fighter jet fell with thick smoke and turned into a fireball on the helicarrier's deck. The fighter jets beside it could only speed up and go around it. Bucky, who was in the cockpit, was cold and emotionless. He maneuvered the silver fighter quickly. He aimed and fired 2 more missiles, one from the left and one from the right, and rushed towards Weiss. "They're here!" Natasha exclaimed. "You don't have to tell me. I know." The cannon on his left hand was still smoking. Weiss took a few steps back and quickly switched to his right hand to charge. He calculated the trajectory and timing of the missiles accurately and intercepted the 2 incoming missiles with a single laser bullet. Boom! The powerful collision between the missiles and the laser bullet exploded in the air between Weiss and the silver fighter jet. In just an instant, the explosive waves and light waves were like tidal waves, violently slapping in all directions, so much so that everything within a 50-meter radius was pushed outwards by the shock waves. In the storm formed by the explosion, the helicarrier was shaken and sank. The fighter jets in the air stagnated and retreated slightly. The unlucky ones were even blown away by the super-strong cyclone. At the same time, there was a turbulence in the black and gray shockwave. The roar of the engine was accompanied by the roar of the engine. The next moment, a broken yellow car full of bullet holes rushed out of the explosion range and rushed toward the helicarrier's deck. In the car, Steve and Natasha were sitting in the driver's seat. Both of them were still in a daze. Why, did it change back? Steve was confused. Most of his technological knowledge was still stuck in World War II. It was difficult for him to understand the actual situation of mechanical armor technology. Natasha took a deep breath and asked, "That's right. The energy cannon is so powerful. Why didn't you take care of the fighter jets behind you first?" "Let me tell you a piece of bad news. I'm almost out of battery," Weiss explained straightforwardly. "What did you say?" The two people in the car were stunned. They subconsciously looked at the rearview mirror. Under the lead of the silver fighter jets, more than a dozen fighter jets continued to chase after the car through the explosion. It was a race of life and death. But this time, it was a helicarrier 1,000 meters above the ground. More than 10 advanced fighter jets were chasing after an old yellow car. This was the first time something like this had ever happened on Earth. "You're saying that you're out of battery at such a critical moment?" Natasha was speechless. Weiss sighed like a human and said helplessly, "The conversion rate of krypton to electricity is too low. Plus, the incomplete transformer mode consumes a lot of energy. Even if the entire krypton is used up after firing almost 10 energy bombs, it's almost depleted. It's already good that I can maintain my car mode and not return to my original form." Then now. Before Steve could finish his sentence, he heard a thud. It was as if something heavy had landed on the roof of the car. Weiss notified, "A Birdman is back." "Birdman? Is it Sam?" Steve was shocked. "It's me." A black uncle was lying on the roof of the car. He was wearing sunglasses. He poked his head out of the windshield and tapped on the window. "Did you find the control panel to reset the carrier's system?" Steve asked. He still had the chip to restart the carrier. "I found it. It's right below the carrier, but I don't have permission to enter." Sam's face was extremely serious. He quickly said, "Also, a helicopter just flew towards the carrier with the director of SHELD on board. I couldn't intercept it midway because there were fighter jets escorting it." "Thank you for your hard work," Steve replied. He then asked Weiss urgently, "Do we still have reinforcements?" "Usually, we would, but now everyone else is." Weiss' answer came to an abrupt end. He said with a trembling voice, "Reinforcements are here." Chapter 292. Under the bright golden sunlight, the metal of the aircraft carrier reflected the gloomy metallic light. Following the dream, little Vig. Launder the pursuit of the fighter fleet, the little yellow car carrying Steve and the others was driving at a terrifying speed that was several times faster than the speed limit. Faint electric sparks surrounded the entire car, the engine and exhaust pipe were already red hot, and the four wheels were constantly emitting smoke and sparks. The front of the car was slightly lifted by the strong wind, and it looked like it was about to soar into the blue sky. Sam retracted a pair of mechanical wings, flipped down, and entered the back seat through the open door. "Reinforcements? That's great, how many?" "One person." "Huh." After a short conversation, the car that continued to move at high speed fell into a long silence again. The silence was completely broken only when the fighter fleet collectively launched a missile attack. The rear of the car seemed to have eyes, either dodging left and right or drifting at high speed. The missiles missed and bombarded the deck of the aircraft carrier, and the dense and powerful bombardment turned the steel floor within a 30-meter radius into a sea of fire. Although the car was not directly hit by the missiles, the outer shell of the car was still ravaged beyond recognition, and the burnt parts were still flashing with electric sparks. The deck of the aircraft carrier was severely damaged, and there were several large holes that could be seen inside the aircraft carrier. "We can't just keep running like this," Sam said with a frown. "You're right, if no one stops Director Pierre and restarts the aircraft carrier program, we'll still lose in the end." Natasha nodded in agreement. The fighter fleet behind us is too troublesome, we have to think of a way to deal with it first. Steve said calmly, but there was anxiety between his eyebrows, and his brain was racking its brain to think of a solution. Hey. Didn't I tell you that we have reinforcements coming soon? Vice reminded again, paused, and then quickly changed his words. Not coming soon. They're already here. Behind the car, the steel belly of a fighter that was about to launch a missile suddenly broke open, as if something sharp had pierced into it, and then the fighter plane was cut in half. Flames and thick smoke spurted out from the fracture. The upper and lower fuselage flipped at high speed and crashed onto the deck below. The missile also caused a second explosion, blasting a tragic black hole in the aircraft carrier's hull. The reversal happened too quickly. Not only were the other pilots shocked, but even Steve and the others who had been alerted earlier. Whoosh! The black stream of light that pierced through the fighter jet slowed down and stopped in the air between the car and the fighter jet. It was a tall dark creature. Its bulging muscles were extremely domineering and wild. Its long and narrow scarlet eyes looked down coldly at the group of fighters. When its gaze fell on the little yellow car, it could not help but shrug its shoulders. Vice's deformed car came to a sudden stop. Its four wheels rubbed against the deck fiercely, and it slowly came to a stop amidst the exaggerated splashing of sparks. The moment the car stopped, it was as if it had been scrapped. The wheels were all flattened, and more than half of the engine had melted into molten iron. The entire car was emitting hot steam. Steve and the rest coughed as they got out of the car. They looked up at the dark creatures that had turned the tide of the battle. That creature destroyed an F-22 fighter jet? Sam slapped himself lightly and covered his painful face. After eliminating the dream, he opened his mouth even more in disbelief. He also had mechanical wings and could fly freely. However, asking him to fight a fighter jet head-on was undoubtedly suicide. Advanced fighter jets were the technological weapons that humans used to conquer the blue sky on Earth and defend the supremacy of the air. But it was destroyed by an unknown dark creature with bare hands? Vice, why didn't you say so earlier? That person is the reinforcement. Natasha recognized the identity of the reinforcement and was the first to breathe a sigh of relief. She patted her heart that was still beating quickly to comfort it. What is that? Steve asked in surprise. When he saw the dark creature, he had a faint sense of familiarity. However, because he had not seen the mode of Venom's full coverage, he did not associate it with the people he knew. Vice got out of the scrapped car and jumped onto Steve's shoulder. He said firmly and respectfully, "That is Master." Master. You said that is Kale? Steve froze and stared at the dark creature in the air. As if noticing his gaze, the dark creature lowered its eyes and said with a slightly hoarse voice, "What happened to you? Why are you in such a sorry state?" "I can't help it. I'm an antique. I can't keep up with the pace of the new era." Steve shrugged and said self-deprecatingly, "Leave this to me. You guys go and intercept Alexander Pierce. While you're at it, restart the system program of the aircraft carrier." As soon as Kale finished speaking, a missile quickly flew towards him. He turned his head and the muscles in his left hand swelled into a black hammer. "Don't you know the rules? You interrupted me." Without dodging, Kale lightly swung the hammer in his left hand and smashed the missile in front of him. Boom! Not sure if it was the missile self-destructing or the heavy hammer, the turbulent blast wave covered Kale's body and buried it. With a flap of his wings, the strong wind blew away the blast wave and the fog. Kale floated in the air unscathed. Black smoke flowed from the heavy hammer and the wreckage of a missile fragment in his other hand. Tearing the fighter with his bare hands and shaking the missile head-on, in the face of this extraordinary ability, everyone's brain was in a state of chaos. And this was just the beginning. Here you go. Kale released the palm of his right hand and the wreckage fell naturally. His right foot was raised back and the strength of his whole body gathered naturally. He kicked the metal wreckage out like a football. It was just a piece of metal wreckage, but at this time, under the kick of more than 10 tons of force, it turned into a different kind of metal cannonball. In the blink of an eye, it crossed a distance of 50 meters and collided with the silver fighter that was still accelerating forward. The silver fighter had already dodged in advance, but it was only grazed by the high-speed metal wreckage. Half of the wing burst and broke on the spot. The out-of-control silver fighter flew diagonally downwards. When it was 10 meters above the deck, the protective hatch of the cockpit opened and the Winter Soldier jumped out from the pilot's seat. Rumble. The fall and explosion of the silver fighter caused the aircraft carrier, which had been bombarded by missiles and was riddled with holes, to sink to a height of 10 meters. Under the deterrence of the terrifying strength, the other pilots were scared out of their wits. They turned around and retreated, maintaining a safe distance at high altitude. This was Kale's overwhelming dominance now. He was the overlord of the earth, the god of the earth. The Winter Soldier fell on the deck and rolled a few times in a row to unload the force. It stood up expressionlessly like a robot and stared coldly at Steve and the others in front of it. Thud. A black shadow passed by. Steve and the others looked carefully. Kale was already standing in front of them, facing the Winter Soldier. Kale. Steve took a step forward nervously and put his hand on Kale's strong waist muscles. Kale understood Steve's intention and said straightforwardly, "I understand what you mean. No one is going to fight with you for the Baki. You can deal with it yourself." "Thank you." Steve nodded, holding the Adaman shield, passed by Kale and walked step by step toward the Baki. "One attack and one defend." Kale shook his head and whispered, turning to look at the rest of the people behind him. Chapter 293. Master. Vice, who was in the form of a small machine, hopped to Kale's feet and stopped. It then bowed and saluted in a gentlemanly manner. A piece of krypton with a full energy value is enough to support the interstellar spaceship of Planet Soccer to travel through the Milky Way. It can sustain Tawny's steel armor for an entire day. It can be converted into electricity to power New York City for 10 minutes. Why is it depleted so quickly on your body? Kale glanced at it and scolded it. He then raised his hand and took out a blue item card. He converted the card into a brand new krypton crystal and threw it to the ground beside his feet. Vice's eyes lit up. It did not care about its gentlemanly manner anymore. It excitedly pounced forward and caught the glowing krypton crystal. It opened its mouth and stuffed it into the black machine's teeth. Vice was lying on the deck of the aircraft carrier. It used the krypton crystal in its hands as food. It chewed it into energy crystals and swallowed them to replenish the energy of its body that was about to be shut down. What a waste. Kale shook his head helplessly. Just one piece of krypton crystal was enough to empty the pockets of the rich people on Earth. Vice Transformer mode was purely a waste of money. It used money to crush the opponent to death. Fortunately, Kale had a huge stockpile of krypton crystals that numbered in the tens of thousands. "Greetings, Master." Natasha pulled Sam's arm and took a step forward. She then knelt on one knee on the deck and saluted respectfully. Mr. Kale." Sam scratched his head. He had not gotten used to the fact that the dark creature that symbolized murder and evil was actually a legendary hero that everyone respected as a symbol of peace. The symbol of peace and the dark creature represented two extremes. Yet, they were the same person. "Master, this is the program chip to restart the aircraft carrier." Fry gave it to Steve. "Steve just gave it to me," Natasha reported as she opened her clenched fist. There were 3 green chips lying in her palm. Each chip corresponded to one aircraft carrier. All 3 chips had to be inserted into the control panel of the aircraft carrier for it to take effect. Is this the key to resolving Operation Insight? Kale muttered coldly. He reached out his hand and picked up the programming disk with 2 fingers. Under the shocked gazes of Natasha and Sam, Kale exerted force in his fingers and crushed the chip into powder. Master, why are you doing this? Natasha widened her beautiful eyes in surprise. Vice is enough. We don't need the chip's cumbersome method of rebooting the aircraft carrier, Kale said calmly. Natasha and Sam looked at Vice, who was still chewing on her corium. Vice seemed to have woken up from a dream and explained, "That's right. I forgot to tell you that as long as I have enough energy and am on an aircraft carrier, I can directly control the satellite and modify the system commands of the aircraft carrier." As she spoke, 2 antennas extended from Vice's forehead. She dug her feet into the steel of the aircraft carrier's deck. Faint electric sparks extended from the deck to the interior of the aircraft carrier. Her mechanical eyes flashed as a series of codes flashed past. A torrent of data was running at a high speed. 3 seconds later, Vice clapped her hands and said, "All right, the aircraft carrier we're on now belongs to me." That's it? Natasha and Sam looked at each other speechlessly. They had been busy dealing with this difficult task, and she had solved 1/3 of it so quickly. You don't believe me? Vice raised her mechanical chest proudly. Without energy, she was indeed a piece of scrap metal. However, she had just chewed on corium and was fully charged. To Earth, Vice was a unique and extraordinary artificial intelligence that was above the top technology. Earth satellite? The radio waves could follow the aircraft carrier's signal trajectory and cross the satellite's protective wall. She could forcefully modify the aircraft carrier's system commands. Then, at this stage of time, what kind of power would the helicopter aircraft carrier, which was publicly built by Earth's top technology, be? Kale thought to himself. He grinned coldly and licked his lips. Vice, try it. Right away. But how do we do it? Vice shook her head excitedly. She looked up at the fighter jets hovering in the air and suddenly realized that they were the best experimental targets. I've never seen the power of an aircraft carrier before. Vice antennas were raised. The aircraft carrier that had been bombarded by missiles and was riddled with holes started to vibrate violently under the command. The cannons on the aircraft carrier's hull started to operate as if they had a temper. The cannons were automatically calibrated and quickly aimed at the fighter jets hovering diagonally above. Counting down. 3, 2, 1. Fire. Vice looked like a commander and said with authority. Following its words, the heavily damaged aircraft carrier that was on the verge of collapse transformed into a superlarge Gatling gun. Hundreds of cannons fired at the same time according to the command. Bang! 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 Countless cannonballs and missiles flew out, dragging long trails of flames and smoke behind them. They formed a destructive cannonball rain that covered an area of 100 meters in the sky. And that 100-meter area was the observation area where the enemy fighter jets were circling. Everything happened too quickly. The remaining 9 fighter jets didn't have enough time to dodge or escape. They were instantly drowned by the cannonballs. The blue sky was filled with smoke and the white clouds were torn apart. The explosion spread out and covered half of the sky above New York City. At noon that day, the people in New York could clearly see the explosion clouds that were more beautiful than fireworks if they looked up. Sam said emotionally, with such power, it's no wonder the 3 helicarriers could destroy the elites of humanity in such a short time. After all, SHELD spent a few years secretly building this, Natasha said matter-of-factly. Its firepower isn't inferior to the space fighter jets. It's just that the helicarriers are too cumbersome. Kale couldn't help but grin when he thought of this. One shouldn't be too greedy. It didn't matter if it was cumbersome or not. The aircraft carrier wasn't meant to be agile and fight alone. It was meant to be a mobile giant base fortress and a transit station. Vice, pass down the system's command and drive this aircraft carrier out of New York, Kale ordered. Are we not going to take this aircraft carrier? Vice asked. It's already heavily damaged. What's the point of keeping it? Let's go steal a new one. Kale looked up and looked at the other two helicarriers that were still in good condition 100 meters away. Master, we're not stealing it. It's ours to begin with. Natasha smiled. Don't make it sound like we're villains. But why do I feel so excited? Sam said with a bitter smile. Unlike Steve's cautious approach, Kale's pace could be described with one word: exhilarating. Chapter 294. It's almost over. In the full state of venom symbiosis, Kale's tone was cold, without a trace of humanity or emotion. Coupled with the dark appearance and violent style of doing things, he really looked like a demon from hell. Natasha and Sam stood respectfully behind him, fully obedient, waiting for Kale to issue orders. Master. Now that the aircraft carrier has crashed out of New York, what should the two people who are still on it do? While Vice raised the question, several people looked at the deck that was bombarded by shells and crashed fighter jets. Smoke and flames raged in the air, the steel holes caused by the missile bombardment, and the wreckage of the fighter jets flew everywhere. Among them, there were two tall blonde young men. One held a Adaman shield that could absorb kinetic energy, and the other relied on a mechanical technological arm that could strike with several tons of impact force. They were entangled with each other fiercely, and it was difficult to tell who had the upper hand. Their sweat and blood spilled on the steel floor around them. You don't have to worry about the battle between Steve and Baki. The bond between the two of them is too deep, and they have been through life and death together. Even if Bucky is brainwashed, his subconscious will not kill Steve. Kale saw through it. The comradeship between the two has been verified for more than half a century. The best interpretation of love-hate relationship was probably just like this. Kale waved his hand and said coldly to Vice, issue a program command to let the aircraft carrier fly out of New York and land and self-destruct when it reaches an uninhabited and remote suburb. Neither of them are ordinary people, and they won't die so easily. Yes, Master. Vice nodded and immediately erected the antenna and edited the aircraft carrier's autopilot route. Isn't this too casual? Natasha and Sam looked at each other and mourned for Steve for 3 seconds in their hearts. The aircraft carrier trembled slightly and no longer continued to rise into the sky. It left the original triangular area and accelerated out of New York. First ship, 2 more to go. Let's go. Kale's face was indifferent as he extended a pair of dark wings. After Vice climbed onto his strong left shoulder, he jumped up and stomped heavily on the ground. 2 clear footprints appeared on the steel deck. It was accompanied by a sharp gust of wind and a sonic boom. Kale turned into a black stream of light and left the deck, heading straight for the second helicarrier that served as the connecting hub. On the original aircraft carrier. Baki, wake up. I'm Steve. Have you forgotten about me? Steve fought while using words to escape. Unfortunately, the Winter Soldier was unmoved. The 5 fingers of the mechanical metal material clasped together, and the left arm bombarded the shield with the help of technology. The shield absorbed more than half of the kinetic energy, but Steve still couldn't bear it and kept retreating, only stopping when he reached a hole in the deck. The raging flames couldn't stop the Winter Soldier whose heart was as cold as ice. He approached expressionlessly, wanting to kill the enemy in front of him who made his mind ripple with memories. 30 meters away from the battle between the two, Sam asked Natasha, "Are we really going to leave Captain Steve like this?" Natasha's lips opened slightly, and she said softly, "Master is right. This is a battle and battlefield that belongs to the captain. It's not convenient for us to intervene. Believe in him. He has survived all kinds of wars and difficulties. There's no reason for him to lose to his own people. Well, I believe in him too. Sam clenched his hand slightly and pressed the control button tied to his palm. The metal backpack on his back immediately unfolded steel wings, slightly flapping the hot and cold air around him. Let's go, hold on tight. Sam took the initiative to reach out his left hand. Natasha held Sam's hand and said in a deep voice, Master is going to the second helicarrier. Let's go and see the situation first. Okay. The engine of the mechanical wing started, and Sam's feet left the deck. He pulled Natasha away from the first aircraft carrier and chased after the trajectory of Kale's flight. The helicarrier with billowing smoke and flames carried Steve and the Winter Soldier towards the direction of the sun that was about to set in the mountains and rivers in the west. At an altitude of 2,000 meters, the second helicarrier, next to the central console. The helicopters were parked next to each other on the deck, and 4 armed men with guns surrounded the console, paying high attention to the surroundings. In the protective area formed by them, Pierre stood alone in front of the console, his hands quickly tapping on the keyboard for personal control. Like Vice, he wanted to modify the program instructions. According to Hydra's original Insight plan, the helicarrier needs to climb to a height close to the atmosphere before Hydra can start the operation. A large number of targets in the American region will be locked on to a large area and a large number of targets for long-range and accurate bombardment. But now the ascent height has not been reached, the operation has not been officially started, and many of Hydra's bases have been destroyed. Pierre even took off his suit jacket, and the white shirt he wore was wet with sweat. His face full of hatred and resentment was slightly distorted, and his fingers tapped hard on the console keyboard. Kale, the symbol of peace, you forced me to do this. I must use the entire city of New York to be buried with the brothers of Hydra. Pierre roared in his heart, approaching the final stage of reprogramming the instructions. When it was about to be completed, a radio wave suddenly impacted and transmitted from the floor into the console. White electric sparks burst out from the keyboard and splashed out. Pierre was shocked. He retracted his hands, wiped his eyes, and looked at the computer screen again. He saw the ace of the demon cards appear there with a funny mechanical smiley face. At the same time, there was a dull sound of something falling behind him, as if something had landed on the deck of the aircraft carrier. Pierce turned his head stiffly and saw the muscular dark creature crouching on the steel floor of the deck. He felt as if his body and mind were about to fall into a sub-zero freezer as long as his eyes met with the creature's scarlet eyes. The symbol of peace is here. The 4 armed men subconsciously pulled the trigger, and the enhanced version of modern firearms fired. Blue flames flickered on the muzzles of the guns, and the bullets turned into small laser beams, shooting holes in the steel of the deck. However, when the steel bullets hit Kyle's tough and shiny black venom skin, all of them bounced off ineffectually and fell to the ground with a crisp tinkling sound, forming a stark contrast that made people shudder. Kneel. Kale said coldly. His sharp eyes swept across, and the 4 armed men did not resist. Under some kind of strong pressure, they let go of the guns, bent their knees, and crawled on the ground in fear, unable to move. Alexander Pierre, what else do you have? If you don't use it now, you won't have the chance. Kale stood in place and looked down at Pierre on the console with a hint of mockery and playfulness on his face. Now, except for the Ancient One, he was invincible on Earth. Pierre clenched his fists stubbornly. He was the interim leader of Hydra and the current director of SHELD. No matter what situation he faced, he would not lose his calm, let alone bow his head and retreat. But at this moment, looking at Kale in front of him, he was an invincible enemy. Pierre's teeth began to chatter, and the muscles all over his body began to tremble involuntarily. Even his noble and unyielding soul began to tremble. Chapter 295. Am I afraid? The muscles on Pierre's face twisted slightly, and his hands pressed his chin in a panic, as if he was trying to stop his teeth from making an ugly sound. Unfortunately, even his palms were trembling up and down with his chin, and every inch of his body was instinctively showing various characteristics of fear. Sweat soaked his shirt and dripped on the hot deck floor, and a few wisps of white steam rose with a sizzling sound. Lost, completely lost. As long as this man exists, the Hydra organization will never have a chance to turn over, and can only hide in a dark and gloomy corner to survive. Pierre smiled sadly, and like the other 4 armed guards, he knelt down facing Kale, who was covered in venom. He was not affected by the coercive ability with force field traction, but because he could not see the future of the Hydra organization, his belief as a spiritual pillar collapsed and he knelt down. The dim light of the setting sun fell on Pierre's body, making him look more lonely and old, making him look like a complete stray dog. Why didn't you do this earlier? You didn't have to do so many tricks. As long as you are on Earth, how can you escape? Kale shook his head gently, and the strong and tough dark horny membrane on his body began to revert to a black liquid, which penetrated into the clothes below and disappeared and merged. After a while, he returned to silver hair, golden eyes, a young and handsome face, and a tall and strong perfect human physique. Venom transformed into a spacious black trench coat and draped over Kale's body in casual clothes. There was no trace of blood, even if it was stained with blood. Kale was like a gentleman who came to a banquet, and there was no sense of déjà vu of killing people like crushing ants. Kale smiled and stepped forward, saying, Red Skull should feel lucky that he touched the tesseract on the fighter, so he might have been exiled outside the Earth with his life intact. He walked past the armed men. Under the pressure of his aura, the 4 of them were almost pressed against the floor. After a final struggle of self-respect, their heads tilted to the side, and white foam came out of their mouths as they fainted. Kale walked up to Pierre and stopped half a meter away from him. He looked down at the back of his head coldly. You can't kill me." Pierre didn't dare to raise his head, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Reason?" Kale shrugged. Pierre took a deep breath and forcefully pulled himself together. He gritted his teeth and said, "Before this, I've already raised the suspicion that I might be framed and killed to the United Nations and the U.S. senators. This is a seed. If you kill me like this, then this seed will start to germinate and grow. Sooner or later, your inhumane demonic atrocities will be criticized and denied by the world. You're right. There is indeed such a hidden danger." Kale nodded in agreement and said with a smile, "But you won't live to see that day. You're going to die here." If he was really the symbol of peace in the hearts of the people, perhaps he would really not kill the enemy, and eventually be punished and tried through the legal channels recognized by the people. Unfortunately, before the false identity of the symbol of peace, he was Kale who had transmigrated and reincarnated. What he did was right. If there was a mistake, then erase and eliminate this mistake. Kale was too lazy to continue the nonsense. He snapped his fingers, and a golden flame ignited between his 2 fingers. The temperature within a few meters of him instantly increased by more than 10 degrees. "You can't do this." Pierre's body trembled more intensely. Sensing that death was about to come, he couldn't help but shout hoarsely, "Little ancestor! Are you still not going to make a move? You said you would help me stop the symbol of peace. Now that I'm about to die, are you still not willing to show up?" The slightly funny cry for help spread far and wide on the deck of the aircraft carrier high in the sky, but no one answered. "Little ancestor?" Kale frowned and looked around. On the second aircraft carrier, other than the 4 armed personnel who had fainted, there was no one else. Mental breakdown? Kale didn't think too much about it. Facing Pierre, he flicked his finger and flicked the golden flame away from his hand. The golden flame that looked like it would be extinguished by the wind contained the power of burning at high temperature. If it landed on a person's head, even the skull would be melted. Pierre held his head and crawled on the ground. The golden flame floated down, and the moment before it touched the back of his head, a subtle ripple that was close to transparent suddenly appeared in the air. The golden flame and the transparent ripple collided and were annihilated little by little until they disappeared without a trace. Who is it? Kale's face was cold, and he quickly turned his head. He didn't know when, but there was a small dwarf standing silently behind him. Less than a meter tall, thin, covered from head to toe in a black cloak, completely obscuring his appearance and true physique. It was impossible to tell whether he was human or alien. I finally meet you. The mysterious person seemed to be laughing, and let out a hoarse and ethereal voice. Are you from the Hydra organization? Kale asked coldly. Because the two were 5 meters apart, he couldn't see the ability card on the other party. But just now, the ability that easily extinguished the divine fire seemed to have a strong spatial aura. Yes, it was space. For Kale, who had come into contact with the dimensional stone, there was no mistaking it. It was a derivative ability of space. Mage? Mutant? Android who experimented with the Tesseract? In a short moment, Kale had many guesses in his mind. The mysterious person had a pair of small eyes that seemed to be staring at Kale. He replied, I'm not a member of the Hydra organization. It's just that the uncle helped me find you, and I promised to save his life. My mother once told me to never go back on my words and break my promise. Then, didn't your mother tell you to be wary of your enemies? As soon as Kale finished speaking, he tapped the floor with the tip of his foot and rushed toward the mysterious person at an extremely fast speed, leaving behind a circle of faint white air waves. He was eager to make a move, not because of his strong desire to kill, but because he wanted to see the ability card on the other party. Space was supreme, time was king. Even the lowest of these two types of abilities was a divine skill that directly connected to the mysteries of the universe. This was also why the Ancient One could be the strongest guardian of the earth against the multiple invasions with the body of a mortal. Kale suddenly moved, but the mysterious person didn't retreat or dodge. Moreover, the two were only 5 meters apart. To read the card's information, one only needed to be within 3 meters, so these 2 meters were not a distance at all. But, 10 seconds later, Kale was still rushing forward, and the distance between him and the mysterious person was still 5 meters. These short 5 meters were like the distance between heaven and earth. No matter how fast he ran, he couldn't close the distance by even a centimeter. Chapter 296. How is that possible? I didn't move. With a flash, Kale suddenly stopped and looked back to see Pierre still lying on the deck behind him. His heart trembled slightly. He looked at the mysterious man in front of him seriously and asked in a low voice, "Did you do that?" "I've been walking in the same place." "Not walking in the same place. You've already run almost 10,000 meters, but I've set up a very small spatial maze for you to go in and out of." The mysterious man also explained the principle seriously. He raised his hands in front of his chest and imitated the movements with his fingers. Puff! A scorching golden flame rushed over. The mysterious man waved his left hand, and the natural and smooth space rhythm moved. The flame was swallowed up by the blue space turbulence 3 meters away. The raging flames, the high temperature, and even the sound were calmed down by the spatial waves. "Who are you?" Kale asked with a more dignified look. The mysterious man's attainment in the use of space power had reached an incredible level. If Kale had the hanging ring, he could use space spells to attack. But now, he could not even get close to the mysterious man's body with his extraordinary power. This was the incomprehensible part of space power. It was one of the strongest abilities derived from the evolution of countless races. If he did not know the Ancient One's character, Kale would really think that the mysterious man in front of him was the Ancient One's bad taste. But at least the spells had some distinguishable gorgeous special effects. The mysterious man's use of space power was more like a derivative of the Tesseract and the primordial stone of space. It was a pure and powerful space power. The primordial stone of space fell into your hands? Kale frowned and continued to ask. This was the first time he met an enemy that made him so curious since he returned to Earth. You have too many questions. I can't answer them even if I want to. The mysterious man curled his lips and said in a hoarse voice, I don't like the environment here. Let's go somewhere else and I'll consider answering your questions. Okay, anywhere is fine as long as it's within the range of Earth. Kale agreed immediately. Because he was skilled and bold, he was not afraid of the mysterious man's trap. Then stand firm. The mysterious man opened his hands, and a faint blue spatial energy wrapped around his body rhythmically like the wind and extended 5 meters away. Kale raised his eyebrows slightly, allowing the familiar spatial energy to envelop him. He had the illusion of summoning the rainbow bridge to cross the universe. Kale was more certain that the mysterious man's ability had a lot to do with the primordial stone of space. At the same time, he also felt a sense of familiarity spontaneously arising from it. Who exactly are you? Before Kale could finish his words, his figure flickered and disappeared from the deck of the second aircraft carrier together with the mysterious man. Who? 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 A cold wind blew across the vast deck. Other than the unconscious armed personnel, Pierre was the only one kneeling on the control panel. When Pierre did not hear the conversation, he tried to raise his head timidly, glanced around in surprise, and murmured to himself in ecstasy, "Is he really gone?" After lying on the ground for a few seconds, Pierre stood up with difficulty after confirming that Kale had left. He patted the dust off his expensive suit and whispered in a happy and cold voice, "The symbol of peace. Letting me run away this time will be the biggest mistake in your life. Even if the Hydra organization is destroyed, one day, I will make a comeback on my own." Pierre roared in his heart, anger and hatred condensed in his eyes, and ran toward the helicopter with renewed faith. Just then, the shadows of the two people were close to the deck, and there was a slight sound of something sharp cutting through the air. Puff! The steel wings folded slightly and landed. Natasha landed first, and then Sam folded his wings completely and landed on the deck of the second aircraft carrier. Where is the master? Where did he go? Natasha was slightly surprised and looked at the unconscious armed personnel on the ground. Looking at the bullet marks on the ground, it seems that there was a short battle here, but it ended quickly. It should be Mr. Kale's doing. Sam said, his sharp eyes wandering around and seeing a person on the side. He was stunned and reached out to grab Natasha in front of him. What's wrong? Natasha turned sideways and looked in the direction of Sam's hint. Suddenly, her eyes met with Pierre, who had his hand on the helicopter and was ready to escape. The three of them stared at each other, and the scene was very strange for a moment. Pierre's face was unprecedentedly ugly, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. His body shrank into the cabin of the helicopter, and he said with a forced smile, "Well, I have something to do, so I'll leave first." Natasha and Sam looked at each other, and both of them showed a meaningful smile. They clenched their fists and stepped forward to surround the helicopter at the same time. "Why are you in such a hurry? Let's have a good chat, Director Pierre." "Deputy Director, let's talk nicely." "Ah!" On the deck of the second aircraft carrier, there were screams and screams that sounded like pigs being slaughtered, and they were transmitted to the distant sky in the high altitude of the setting sun. On the other side, Europe. A moment ago, it was still the deck of an aircraft carrier with cold wind and steel equipment everywhere. The next moment, he was already on the charming city streets with neon lights flashing in the night. The two styles of quiet and lively formed a sharp contrast. With a sense of unreality like a dream, Kale stood on the bustling street for half a second, and the vehicles and pedestrians on the road around him came and went like turbulent water. Fortunately, he had exited Venom's full coverage mode, otherwise, with the terrifying appearance of the dark monster, it would cause panic as soon as he was teleported here. Another thing was that the mysterious person who teleported him here was gone. "Sir, are you okay?" A mustached gentleman in a black suit with embroidered flowers and a bow tie on his chest came forward and greeted him politely. "This is Dash." Kale looked up calmly and found himself in front of a luxurious building. "Sir, this is the Bird Club. Do you have a membership card here? If not, you can come in and learn more." The mustached gentleman responded politely. As a waiter of this high-end club, with more than 10 years of work experience, he had seen all kinds of rich and powerful people, but it was the first time he saw Kale's aura that seemed to be born strong. Bird Club? Kale's heart trembled, and some old memories were pried open, and some fragments flashed through his mind for no reason. The cards of roses, the late party, the embrace and the dance to the song, this is the Bird Club, it still exists after so long? Kale's voice was low, and there was a complicated expression on his face. Yes, our Bird Club is the oldest high-end dance club in Europe. It was built in 1940 and has been renovated more than 10 times, and it has been preserved to this day. It is one of the most popular clubs for the aristocrats and the upper class in Europe. The mustached gentleman said proudly, "Rumor has it that during World War II, a legendary hero also came here as a customer." Kale did not listen, but silently walked past him, step by step up the stairs and walked toward the grand door of the club. Chapter 297. The Tubio Club. The location of the building hadn't changed at all. Instead, it had expanded to both sides and looked more spacious than before. There were still steps and a red carpet in front of the club building. The entrance was still brightly lit and the atmosphere was pleasant. Inside the entrance, there was still a low-key and luxurious old-style reception desk and corridor. Stepping into it, people could experience the elegant atmosphere of the celebrities decades ago. "Sir? Sir?" Following the whiskered waiter all the way, Kale walked over the threshold in a trance. His eyes swept over all the familiar layout and items in the club. Since the last time he left here, not to mention this dance club, he hadn't even returned to Europe. In the blink of an eye, more than 60 years had passed. What was the meaning of "things remain the same but people have changed"? Things were still there and could be disguised by new things, but some people could no longer be seen and disappeared in the long river of time. This was the unavoidable sorrow of all living beings in the Marvel Universe, with the exception of a few races. "Why did you bring me here?" Facing the empty air, Kale whispered coldly and quietly clenched his 5 fingers. Now, there weren't many things that could touch his humanity, but coincidentally, the Tubio Club was one of them. "Sir, I'll have to trouble you." 2 tall guards in suits with broad shoulders and strong waists stared vigilantly at Kyle, who was standing at the door in a daze. They stepped forward, one on the left and one on the right, wanting to stop him and drive him out. After all, the Tubio Club was a place for celebrities to socialize. People without a certain status and recommended by a member were not qualified to enter the door, let alone apply for a membership card. And people with a membership card, after a few years, they wouldn't make a mistake. The 2 doormen stepped forward and reached out their hands to Kale. But the next moment, all their movements were abruptly stopped. A strong and substantial pressure came crashing down like a huge mountain. Exhaling, Kale loosened his clenched fists, ignored the doormen on both sides, and continued to walk into the corridor with just the right lighting. He walked to the reception desk with a waitress. "Hello, sir. How can I help you?" The waitress on duty turned pale and hurriedly greeted Kale. She secretly glanced at the 2 guards not far behind Kale. The 2 guards, who were retired elite Russian special forces, were barely supporting each other at this moment. They kept waving their hands to wipe the cold sweat on their foreheads, as if they had been frightened by something. What on earth happened that could scare the fearless Russian to this extent? Kale thought for a moment and said calmly to the waitress, "I want to check the spending records of membership card 006. He had come here for the mysterious man, but now, he wanted to ask another question. Membership card spending records? The waitress was stunned and said with a troubled expression, "I'm very sorry. Our computer system does not have the right to read the spending records of the membership cards. Moreover, the top 10 membership cards are the supreme membership cards specially made by our club. They will only be given to special members and guests. No one has the right to check the spending records of the card holders." System authority? What is this? Kale smiled and tapped the screen of the electronic watch with his finger. He shrugged and reminded, "Vice, it's your turn to play a role." "No problem, Master." Vice agreed and extended an antenna to invade the host data of the building where the club was located with radio waves. "Sir, what are you?" The waitress was puzzled. Then, the lights at the reception desk, in the corridor, and even in the whole club building went out in an instant. The lights flashed a few times as if the wiring was faulty, and then they returned to normal. Then, Vice's voice sounded again, "Found it, Master. Show it to me." Kale's eyes flickered, and he ordered in a low voice. "Broadcast it for you." Vice's eyes turned gloomily and projected a three-dimensional graph that clearly listed the spending records of the membership cards in numbers and English. Kale glanced at it roughly. The first record was the first spending record at the beginning of 1944, which was the day when Steve's fighter jet crashed into the ice and he came back to hold a late dance party. There were detailed records of the number of people and the amount of spending. The time of spending was only accurate to the day and year. It should have been a handwritten record by the staff, but it was later re-registered in the computer system after the computer was made available to the public. After that day, he gave the number 006 card to the waitress and asked her to give it to Paige Carter. Kale looked down and was slightly stunned. At the end of 1944, there were more than 30 spending records, all of which were records of Paige Carter's usage. At the end of 1944, the date of the last spending record was less than half a month away from the date of death recorded on Paige Carter's grave. It was hard to imagine that a woman who was dying of a serious illness would frequently come to the Bird Club almost every day. If there were no relatives or acquaintances of hers here, it meant that there were precious memories that she could not forget here. Carter. Kale muttered to himself. At this moment, he remembered many things, and the last memory stopped at the parting with Carter. It was a farewell kiss under the setting sun at dusk. Kale shook his head slightly, withdrew his emotions, and rationally looked at the bottom of the recording image projected by Vice. From 1944 to 2007, there was a blank space. That was to say, after Carter's death, no one used the number 006 card to spend here. Until 2008. This year, this month, a day ago, there was a spending record that had not ended until now. Who on earth used Carter's card? Kale did not have to think about it, and the figure of the mysterious man immediately appeared in his mind. "Did you get a single room?" 301. After reading the last bit of important information, Kale picked up the Vice on the table, and disappeared in a flash. He turned into a blurry black shadow and swept through the corridor quickly. The waitress opened her eyes wide as if she had seen a ghost. When she was about to scream, her mouth was covered by someone's big hand. While she was panicking, she took a closer look and found that it was her doorman who covered her mouth. They were two tall and strong Russian men. She calmed down a little. "What are you doing? Why didn't you stop that man just now?" The waitress asked confusedly. "Stop? How can we stop him?" One of the doormen said with a wry smile, "Haven't you recognized who he was just now?" "Who?" The waitress blinked. The other doorman patted his chest with lingering fear. "You keep talking about him all day long. It's the legend who came to the club during World War II." "No way." The waitress was a little confused for a moment. After a moment of silence, she opened her mouth in surprise. "By the way, I even forgot such an important thing. Number 006 is the number that the Bird Club made for that person." You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.